Jon Snow's first memory of the dragon was like something out of a dream he could scarcely recall, a vision half obscured by the haze of twilight and the uncertainty of a boy who had never quite belonged. He had been traveling north of the Wall with a handful of rangers on Lord Commander Mormont's orders. Their mission was simple enough: to chase down a rumor. The wildlings had whispered of a beast that roamed the icy wilderness, a monstrous creature they claimed was neither dire wolf nor bear. Some said it flew at night, black against the gray sky. Others had sworn it had glowing eyes and claws like razors. Jon and his brothers in black had heard enough tall tales that they should have laughed it off. Yet there was a resoluteness in the wildlings' eyes, those who had glimpsed the thing and lived to speak of it, that made the hair on Jon's neck prickle. He had been new to the Watch then, still reeling from the realities of a life in the cold. The Wall was cruel and endless, and the wind cut a man's face and soul alike. Ghost padded beside him, as silent as a ghost truly, his red eyes searching the emptiness. The rangers he traveled with were older, more seasoned, though they accepted Jon's skill with a sword and bow. They put faith in him, if not in his parentage. And so Jon was determined to help them discover whether the creature was a starved bear or a fabled monster from old wives' tales. He clutched his cloak tighter and pressed on with the others. They found the first sign at the edge of a frozen ravine where the snow was churned up into a mess of footprints that seemed far too large to be from anything natural. Long grooves were carved into the ice, as if something had landed with enough weight to fracture the crust. The men exchanged glances. Some tried to laugh it away. Jon simply stared, hearing the rush of blood in his ears. Ghost stiffened, sniffing the air. They knew there was something out there. The thought lingered in each man's mind. The stories of dragons were from the age of legends, but had not Daenerys Targaryen, far to the east, somehow resurrected 3 from stone eggs? Could there be another such miracle hidden in the far north, beyond the memory of man? They followed the tracks until sunset. By then, the wind had picked up and was slashing across the land in furious gusts. Hard pellets of snow fell like tiny knives. Each man struggled to keep his eyes open and his body upright, forging a path through drifts that came up to their thighs. It was no place for men to be gallivanting after a ghost story, and Jon began to wonder if they should turn back. Then they heard it, a deep, resonant sound that reverberated off the ice walls and made every man halt in place. It was like a roar, but so low it could have been the grating of massive boulders. Jon felt it rumble through his chest. They pressed on, hearts pounding. The last light of day flickered like a distant candle as they approached a shallow valley. There, amidst jagged rocks and wind-sculpted ice, lay a sight so surreal Jon scarcely believed it. A creature lay curled, half-covered in frost and snow, colossal wings folded close to its sides. Even with half its body disguised by winter's shroud, it was unmistakably reptilian. A dragon. It was the color of nightfall and possessed the outline of horns and ridges that crowned its massive head. At that moment, it seemed more statue than living creature. The rangers froze. One man muttered a prayer to the 7, another hissed at him to keep his voice down. Jon felt a surge of something that was not quite fear nor wonder. It was awe, but more than that, it was recognition, as if this impossibility was meant to happen. Ghost stood at his side, silent, watchful. With delicate caution, Jon stepped forward. His every footfall crunched in the snow, the sound impossibly loud in the hush of that darkening world. The dragon opened one eye. It glowed in the dusk like a dying ember, the pupil narrow and fierce. A wave of heat, or perhaps simple terror, rushed across the group of men. The ranger at Jon's left lost his footing, stumbling back. Another readied a crossbow. That movement alone might have sealed their fate in an instant. Jon felt a surge of desperation. He stepped even closer, lifted both palms in what he could only hope was a gesture of peace. The dragon's eye flicked from the crossbow to Jon's hands, and the beast shifted. Snow and ice cascaded from its mighty flank as it uncurled. The men behind Jon shouted for him to back away. But Jon did not retreat. Perhaps it was foolhardy courage, perhaps something deeper, older stirred in his veins. He remembered ghost stories old Nan told him as a child, tales of Targaryens and dragons that soared across the sky. He had always believed himself a Stark in all but name, yet at that moment, as the wind roared around them, Jon felt something else. The dragon's presence was like the hush before a storm, a quiet moment of electricity that teased the air with possibility. Jon reached out, not quite believing what he was doing, and placed a gloved hand upon the dragon's snout. A spark leapt between them, if not physical, then spiritual, and the dragon's pupil expanded, the ember glow softening for a heartbeat. The men behind Jon looked on in dumbstruck silence. Ghost emitted a single, almost tentative bark. The crossbowman lowered his weapon in astonishment. Then the dragon snorted, a hot blast of breath that stung Jon's cheeks and fogged the night. A low rumble vibrated through its throat. In that moment, Jon realized that this creature was not an adult, not by the standards of the legends. It was large, dwarfing any horse or direwolf, but not nearly as massive as the stories spoke of Balerion or Vhagar. The wings had ragged edges, the creature looked malnourished, scarred. Perhaps it had been surviving on whatever meager game roamed beyond the wall. Perhaps it had been alone for so long that it clung to life by will alone. Looking into its eyes, Jon felt a wave of compassion. He gently touched the scaled nose. The rest of the men stood stunned. The dragon allowed it. With a slow blink, it seemed to accept Jon's presence. The moment felt strangely intimate, more akin to meeting a stray animal than a living engine of destruction. Jon Snow, born to no name he could publicly claim, exiled to the Night's Watch, pressed his hand against a living dragon's snout and lived to tell the tale. He said nothing aloud, for what words could capture such a miracle? The stirring in his blood told him all he needed to know, something connected them, something woven into his very being. The next minutes blurred, the men pulled back, uncertain what to do. The largest question hung unspoken in the freezing air: should they kill the monster, or leave it, or somehow try to claim it? No one dared speak the word dragon aloud, as if saying it might cause the creature to unleash fire upon them. But Jon, with his hands still on that scaled snout, felt a different kind of certainty. The beast was weakened from the cold, from starvation. If it were a threat, it could easily have devoured them all, but it remained still, watchful, as if waiting. Jon turned to the Rangers. "We can't leave it here," he said softly, unsure how they would respond. In truth, he did not know why the words poured from his lips. Perhaps some deeper urging forced him to speak. The older Rangers cast anxious glances around, but they respected Jon, and none wanted the blood of a dragon on their hands. One of them suggested returning to Castle Black, reporting to Mormont. Another spat on the ground, muttering that it was a demon. Yet no one stepped forward to kill it. Eventually, they decided to camp. It was the only sensible option, with night falling and the storms growing fierce. The dragon remained where it was, though it shifted now and again, releasing quiet grunts and puffs of hot breath. Jon stayed closest, feeding it scraps of dried meat from his own rations, which it devoured eagerly. The size of its teeth alone was enough to make a man tremble, but Jon felt, in his deepest core, no fear. He couldn't explain it to himself. He only knew that he felt a sense of kinship, as though he were not alone in the cold for the first time in his life. The watchman built a small fire, partly to keep warm, partly to keep the dragon in sight. They took turns on guard, none daring to sleep deeply. Jon dozed fitfully, ear pressed to the frozen earth, ghost beside him, feeling the presence of the dragon in every breath of wind. In the morning, the men found that the dragon had not moved far. Snow had covered its back again, and it looked pitiful in the weak daylight. That was when Jon made the boldest suggestion of his life: "We take it home." The men gaped at him, but the idea took hold. They had a handful of horses and no small measure of resolve. Perhaps, if the dragon would follow, they could lead it near to Castle Black, shelter it in one of the remote caverns at the base of the wall. It sounded mad, but there was no easy alternative. So they tried. Jon coaxed the dragon onto its feet, speaking in hushed tones, unsure if the beast understood a single word. He held out meat, encouraging it to move. Slowly, the dragon rose to its full height, stretching cramped muscles. Its wings unfurled partway, battered but still formidable. There was a hiss that might have been pain or impatience. Though it could have soared away, it did not. That was the first sign, a loyalty or curiosity that bound it to Jon. The men formed a loose perimeter around the creature, weapons at the ready more out of caution than malice. And they began the long trek home, hearts pounding with the knowledge that they led an actual dragon across the frozen wilderness. The journey tested them all. Gales of wind punished any exposed skin. The Rangers trudged through deep drifts, always scanning the horizon for wildlings or worse. More than once, they thought they spotted whites lurking in the distance, but none dared approach a company traveling with a dragon. Indeed, the very sight of that reptilian silhouette must have been enough to keep any threat at bay. Still, the creature grew weaker, stumbling in the high snow, requiring more food than they could spare. Jon and the men resorted to hunting what game they could find. The dragon consumed entire deer, cracking bones in its jaws, swallowing hunks of meat in single gulps. As the days passed, the watchers saw something in Jon's face. A quiet determination, as though he possessed knowledge beyond his 19 years. There was something Targaryen about him, if any of them had thought to guess. but he kept his secrets close. For Jon, every hour spent near the dragon strengthened a feeling he could not name. It was as though the two were forging a bond in the wilderness. A bond of life or death, anchored in some ancestral magic older than the wall. When at last they neared the shadow of Castle Black, half the men thought the other half mad. The fortress erupted in alarm. Horns blared. Men rushed to the battlements, bows drawn, hearts hammering. Through shouted orders and frantic gestures, the rangers somehow convinced their brothers not to loose arrows. The commanding officers came forth, pale as ghosts, demanding explanations. Jon did his best to provide them. He stood before the Lord Commander, whose disbelief warred with wonder. Mormont's craggy face looked as though it might shatter from tension. "A dragon," he muttered half to himself. "You bring a dragon?" Jon had no easy answer. "It lives," he said softly, "and it follows me." He glanced back at the creature, which loomed at the edge of the courtyard, spooked by the noise but too exhausted to flee. Its black scales seemed dull in the watery daylight. A hush fell over the courtyard. Some men cursed, others prayed. Mormont pinched the bridge of his nose, then beckoned Jon inside. The young man followed, his cloak stiff with ice, heart thrumming. They convened behind closed doors. Mormont demanded to know the full story. Jon told it plainly. How they found the dragon near death, how it allowed him to approach, how it followed them back. For the first time, Jon confessed that he felt a bond, though he knew not how or why. "It trusts me," he said, recalling the nights spent curled near the beast to keep it warm, offering words of comfort. "And I trust it." An astonished silence followed. Then the Lord Commander exhaled. "This is a weapon," he said. "We are few, and our enemies are many. The White Walkers stir. If we have tamed a dragon, the possibilities are endless. But do not fool yourself, boy. A dragon is no pet." Jon only nodded, aware of a deeper truth stirring inside him. He was no master of anything, only a caretaker. The Lord Commander rallied men to gather food stores and find a suitable space, albeit temporary, for the dragon. Word spread through Castle Black like wildfire. Some men were terrified, others enthralled. A few wanted the creature killed outright, calling it an abomination. But cooler heads prevailed, and curiosity won the day. In the weeks that followed, the Night's Watch fed the dragon game from the forests south of the wall, building crude pens for goats and sheep. Jon spent hours each day in the dragon's presence, stroking its flanks, speaking softly. He found that the dragon's temperament was wary but not violent. It nuzzled Jon's hand, let him run a brush over its scales to remove the grime and frost. The older rangers looked on, dumbfounded. Sam Tarly, with his gentle nature, inched closer than most, marveling at the creature's wingspan, scribbling frantic notes in a book. Jon named the dragon, though it felt presumptuous, Midnight, for the color of its scales and the hush that always surrounded it. The name came to him in a dream. Over time, the dragon responded to it, or so Jon believed. Mormont was uneasy about the arrangement but recognized its value. He ordered a few small attempts at training. Could the dragon be taught to flame on command to carry a rider? At first, it seemed beyond them. The beast was still healing, lacking the strength to fly more than short distances. But Jon did not give up. He coaxed it out of the courtyard, across the fields to practice short flights, always within the shadow of the wall. The sight of it launching into the air, wings beating heavily, black scales glinting in the light, was a wonder none would forget. Men would gather to watch. Some overcame their fear and even clapped in encouragement. Every successful landing swelled Jon's heart. There was something about the dragon that felt right, as if it belonged with him or he with it. But not all was well at the wall. The White Walkers were stirring, wildling raiders tested the defenses, and rumors flew south like black crows. Mormont knew they could not keep a dragon's secret for long. Ravens carried the news to King's Landing. The realm was already in chaos. King Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne. The North had declared itself under Robb Stark. Stannis Baratheon claimed that he was the rightful heir, and Daenerys Targaryen gathered her own forces across the sea. Now there was a new rumor, another dragon hatched in the far north, tamed by the bastard of Winterfell who wore the black. Stories spread like wildfire, each retelling more fantastical than the last. For Jon, the days were full of training and forging a deeper connection with Midnight. He discovered that the dragon responded to certain vocal cues, that it would follow him unbidden, that it seemed to sense his moods. Once, a group of new recruits mocked Jon's parentage, his bastard name, in the dragon's presence. Midnight hissed, bearing fangs as long as a man's forearm. The recruits shrank back, pale. Jon had to calm the beast with a quiet hand on its snout, murmuring, "Easy, easy." A hush enveloped them. In that moment, the recruits recognized that mocking Jon Snow while a dragon listened might be the last mistake they ever made. The bond grew stronger. Soon, Jon dared to climb upon Midnight's back. The first time was terrifying, as the dragon was still building its strength. With a powerful sweep of its wings, it took to the sky, and Jon's heart leapt into his throat. The world spun, and the cold air stung his cheeks. But beneath the fear came a rush of exhilaration unlike anything he had known. He gripped the makeshift harness they had fashioned. The flight was short, but it ended gently enough in a swirl of snow outside the gates. Men crowded around, breath steaming, eyes as wide as plates. A cry went up, half cheer, half disbelieving exclamation. Jon slid off Midnight's back on shaky legs, a grin tugging at his lips. So it was that the men of the Watch began to see a new symbol of hope in their midst. Perhaps with a dragon they could stand against the horrors of the far north. Perhaps they would at last be remembered, not just as exiles and criminals, but as protectors. Mormont recognized the danger and the promise. He told Jon, time and again, this beast could unite or destroy the realm, depending on who commands it. Jon only bowed his head. He did not feel like a commander. He was a bastard who had sworn an oath. But within him, old words from old tales echoed, blood of the dragon. They did not know it then, but Midnight's growth would soon astonish them all. Whatever stunted its early development fell away once the beast had consistent food and relative safety. Month by month, its body lengthened, its wingspan broadened, its appetite multiplied. Men whispered that they needed to find entire herds of sheep to satisfy the dragon's hunger. And with growth came power. Fire spewed from its jaws in great torrents, melting the top layers of snow in practice drills. Sometimes, the Watchers saw that the flame was tinged with a deep violet color at the edges, an eerie phenomenon that set their hearts pounding. Jon adapted, too. With Sam's help, he pored over old texts, searching for any scrap of knowledge about dragon lore. The Targaryens had once commanded the beasts through horns and whip, but that was not Jon's way. He relied on trust, on the intangible bond between them. And that bond was tested when word arrived from beyond the wall of a wildling host gathering under Mance Rayder. Jon received secret instructions from Mormont to infiltrate the wildlings, to learn their plans. The Lord Commander feared that if they marched on the wall, not even a dragon could hold them back indefinitely, especially if the others moved with them. So Jon went, leaving Midnight behind in the care of a few chosen brothers. The parting was difficult. The dragon sensed his departure, letting out a plaintive roar that echoed off the mountains. Jon stroked its muzzle, reassuring it that he would return, though he did not know how or when. The Watchers who remained behind huddled anxiously in its presence, for without Jon, the beast grew restless and irritable. But the mission was vital. The realm needed answers. Jon had sworn an oath to the Night's Watch, and no bond, dragon or otherwise, could supersede that. Beyond the wall, he joined the wildlings, learned of Mance's grand plan to lead his people south to escape the White Walkers. But events did not unfold as they had in the original history. Because this time, there was a dragon waiting at Castle Black, and the wildlings knew it. Rumors flitted through the free folk, some proclaiming that the beast must be killed, others believing it a sign that the gods were punishing them. When the fateful day came that Mance's forces approached the wall, Jon was torn between loyalty to the Watch and his compassion for the wildlings' desperate plight. He tried to broker peace, but fear and old hatreds ran deep. It was then that the ground rumbled with the sound of massive wind. Yes, Midnight, sensing Jon's danger or perhaps responding to the signals the Lord Commander gave, soared overhead, casting a long shadow upon the wind-blown snow. The wildlings looked up in horror. Thousands of them had never seen a dragon except in old stories told around the fires. Its roar was deafening, echoing across the tundra. Jon was at the front, shouting for calm, though his voice was lost in the cacophony. Wildling archers knocked arrows. A volley soared skyward. Most fell short. The ones that hit glanced off the dragon's scales. Flames burst from Midnight's jaws, forming a wall of fire that halted the wildling advance in a terrifying display of power. Men and women scrambled back, screams mingling with the roar of the inferno. To the watch, it was a miracle. The black-clad men on the wall cheered, seeing that the wildling army was broken. But Jon's heart twisted at the sight of the carnage and fear. He implored the Night's Watch to cease. He begged Mance to yield. The presence of the dragon made negotiations possible where otherwise a brutal battle would have raged. Mance recognized they could not hope to breach the wall while a dragon circled above. Parley was arranged. Jon stood with Midnight lurking behind him, its massive head peering over his shoulder like a living threat. Mance approached, guarded by his fiercest warriors. The tension was thick enough to slice with a dagger. There, in the bitter cold, Jon pleaded for peace. He explained that the White Walkers were the real enemy, that the dragon was not there to slaughter the free folk but to protect the realm of the living. Silence followed, until Mance gave a slow, grim nod. "I will not condemn my people to be burned," he said. A tentative ceasefire was declared, leading to an uneasy alliance. Some wildlings agreed to come south in smaller groups, to settle peacefully if the Watch would allow it. Word of a new alliance at the wall, brokered by Jon Snow and enforced by a dragon's might, spread quickly through the Seven Kingdoms. King Joffrey, upon hearing such news, spat in fury at the notion that a bastard boy in black commanded a beast of legend. Tywin Lannister's mind began whirring, seeing the potential threat. Far to the east, Daenerys Targaryen listened to the whispers of a dragon in the north with both curiosity and wariness, uncertain if it was friend or foe to her cause. Stannis Baratheon, hearing the Red Priest's prophecies, believed the dragon a sign from R'hllor, an omen that he must press his claim. For Jon, these shifting tides of fate were secondary to the reality that the threat of the others loomed larger every day. Strange reports came in of whites prowling the woods, of entire villages deserted. Even with a dragon, the Night's Watch was far from secure. Mormont realized they needed resources, alliances, and recognition from the south if they were to stand against the darkness. So letters were sent, and one day a royal procession arrived at the wall. Melisandre of Ashai came first, her red robes vivid against the snow, followed by Ser Davos Seaworth and finally Stannis Baratheon himself. They brought men, ships, supplies, enough to bolster the Watch if they pledged their loyalty to Stannis as the rightful king. Mormont was wary of any politics. The Night's Watch was sworn to neutrality, but Stannis was persistent, offering protection and naming Jon Snow the Warden of the North if he bent the knee. The notion was preposterous. Jon was a sworn brother of the Watch, unable to hold titles. But Melisandre's eyes gleamed when she saw the dragon. She spoke cryptic words of prophecy, calling Jon the prince that was promised, or perhaps a figure of equal importance. Her presence unsettled Jon. He felt something dark and hungry in her gaze, as if she saw the dragon as a tool for her god's design. That night, in the courtyard, she tried to approach Midnight. The dragon recoiled, baring its fangs, letting out a low, throbbing hiss. Melisandre retreated, face unreadable. Still, the supplies and extra men strengthened the Watch's position considerably. With them, the repairs to the old fortifications hastened. More rangers patrolled the haunted forest. Several times, when whites were spotted, Midnight took flight, scorching them into ash. Jon realized how invaluable the dragon's flame was against the undead. But each battle, small though it was, reminded him of the greater war to come. The others were out there, waiting with a patient, icy malice. Months passed, and in that time, Midnight grew like a living storm. He was no longer just large, he was gargantuan, bigger than the Watch's courtyards could comfortably contain. The black wings extended in a span that dwarfed the battered towers of Castle Black. Men began to whisper the name Balerion in reverent, fearful tones. They saw a shadow in the sky that reminded them of the Black Dread come again. Jon, too, was astonished by the transformation. On the rare days when he dared to ride the beast, they soared above the clouds, the wind howling in his ears. Looking down, the wall seemed like a thin white line dividing the world. And in those moments, Jon realized that there were few limits to what a dragon could achieve if it willed it. Whispers arrived from the south, wars raged still. The Lannisters, the Tyrells, the remnants of House Baratheon. The North remained loyal to King Robb Stark, though the Red Wedding had not yet occurred in this altered timeline, or perhaps had been delayed. News trickled in that Robb battled his way south, forging alliances. Jon's heart clenched at the thought of his half-brother at war. But each time he reminded himself that his place was the Wall and that the true war was yet to come. He was no lord, no heir, only a man in black with a dragon at his side. Yet fate has a way of ignoring what men want. One bleak evening, when the sun sank behind thick clouds and the wind moaned like a lost soul, a raven arrived bearing dire news. The White Walkers had been spotted en masse, marching with an army of whites, heading straight for the Wall. The dreamlike terror that had haunted the edges of reality was now manifest. The Night's Watch rallied. The men's faces were pale, yet determined. Stannis' forces braced themselves, and Mance's wildlings, uncertain but aware of the threat, agreed to stand with them. In the days that followed, Castle Black prepared for siege. Fires were lit atop the wall, pitch cauldrons readied, archers stationed along the battlements. Midnight took to the skies daily, scanning the horizon. The tension was suffocating, like a thick blanket of dread laid over every man. Jon stood atop the wall, Ghost at his side, scanning the northern wastes for movement. He could only guess at the approach of the dead. When the first wave finally appeared, it was worse than any nightmare. An ocean of silent figures advanced, swathed in snow and twilight. At the forefront strode tall, gaunt shapes with skin like ice and eyes burning blue. The others. The army of the dead spread across the plains, an unholy legion that dwarfed any living host. Torches seemed feeble against that endless tide. 100 men or more lost their nerve at the sight, though some found new resolve in the knowledge that they had a dragon. At dawn, the battle began. The whites surged against the base of the wall. Arrows rained down, but the dead kept coming. Siege weapons spewed fire, and still the mass advanced. Then midnight descended, landing behind the wall. Jon climbed upon his scaled back, heart hammering. This was madness. Even with a dragon, the numbers were too great. But he had to try. For the living, for the men of the Watch, for all of Westeros. They rose into the sky, a black shape blotting out the sun. The watchers on the wall shouted encouragement. Midnight dove upon the ranks of whites, unleashing a torrent of flame so intense it lit the ice fields ablaze. Bones crackled and popped. Smoke billowed upward. Scores upon scores of the dead were incinerated in an instant. Ghostly shrieks rent the air. Yet the White Walkers merely raised their arms, and a bitter cold wind swept across the battlefield, extinguishing flames in eerie patches. Still, the onslaught continued. Midnight banked for another pass. Fire raked across the lines. The stench of burning flesh was overpowering, but the dead did not retreat. Again and again, the dragon scorched them, lightning strikes of living flame in a sea of corpses. But still they surged, tireless, unstoppable. Jon guided Midnight lower, trying to spot the White Walkers themselves, for rumors said that slaying the Masters might fell the lesser whites. He glimpsed the tall, pale figures moving like specters amidst the chaos. Grimly, he urged the dragon forward. Another blast of flame erupted. One of the walkers was caught in the inferno, shattering like ice when the flames touched it. Jon's spirit soared. This was possible. They could win if only they managed to kill them all. The battle raged the entire day. With the combined efforts of the Night's Watch, Stannis' men, the wildlings, and the unstoppable fury of a dragon, they kept the dead at bay. By nightfall, the battlefield was a wasteland of smoking corpses. Many men had died, but many lived, and the White Walkers had withdrawn to the far edges of the plain. For the moment, it seemed they had achieved the impossible. Cheers rang across the wall, echoing in the night. Jon dismounted from Midnight, who hissed steam from his nostrils, exhausted but victorious. Men pounded Jon on the back, cheering him as a hero. Stannis approached with a grave nod. Even Mance Rayder acknowledged that without the dragon, all would have been lost. Yet, though they won the day, the war was far from ended. The others remained a looming threat, with the power to raise the dead. Jon knew that if they did not press forward and find some way to end the menace, the cycle would continue. Worse, the politics of the South threatened to tear the Seven Kingdoms apart when unity was most needed. With a sense of grim purpose, Jon resolved that simply defending the wall would not be enough. They had to do something unthinkable. Carry the fight to the others in the frozen heart of the North. Over the next weeks, aided by Melisandre's dark whispers, Stannis prepared an expedition. He spoke of forging a new kingdom of men, promised to him by the Lord of Light, if he could vanquish the White Walkers. But it would be a doom-laden quest. For who could stand in the land of always winter against such ancient evil? Jon wrestled with uncertainty. His vow to the Watch was clear, to guard the realms of men. But to truly guard them, he must go north, beyond the known edges of the map, where only midnight and terror dwelt. He alone commanded a weapon that might tip the scales. A dragon mightier than any living memory. Mormont, too old to undertake the journey himself, gave Jon his blessing, albeit with a heavy heart. When the host marched north, it was smaller than one might expect for such a colossal threat. Only the bravest dared go, for many believed it a suicide mission. But the hardships of the trek meant large armies would only starve. They relied on the strength of the dragon and the cunning of a small, determined force. Among them, Jon Snow, ghost at his side, riding upon Midnight's broad back, Tormund Giantsbane, leading a band of wildling warriors with savage determination. Stannis Baratheon, proud and resolute, wearing the flaming heart of the Red God upon his breastplate. Melisandre, her eyes alive with fanatic fire, certain she was guiding a prophesied champion. And a handful of other knights and rangers, each prepared for a final confrontation. They traveled deep into the frostbitten north where the winds howled and the days were as short as a blink. Time lost meaning. Endless expanses of ice spread in every direction, glinting under a pale, half-dead sun. Each morning, they awakened to the knowledge that they were the intruders in a land older and crueler than any civilization. The dead came for them in small skirmishes, testing their defenses. Midnight's fire never failed to send them scattering, but each victory drained supplies, cost lives, and gnawed at morale. And then they reached the domain where the White Walkers truly ruled. A place of ice formations as tall as castle towers, twisting and shimmering in the eerie half-light. The temperature was so cold that men's beards froze solid, their eyelashes crackled, and breath turned to crystals. On a barren plateau beneath a sky of swirling green and purple lights, they faced the full might of the others. Dozens of them emerged from the swirling snow, each bearing an icy blade that shone with a terrible brilliance. Behind them, an army of whites that stretched to the horizon. This was no mere skirmish. It was the final stand. Stannis men formed ranks, battered shields raised. Wildlings hefted crude axes, their breath ragged. Melisandre lifted her hands in prayer, chanting to Lawler, calling for the red sword of heroes. Jon stared into the swirling storm, knowing that the fate of Westeros balanced on a knife's edge. Then he climbed atop Midnight, patted the dragon's neck. "We do this together," he whispered. Midnight rumbled in response. He soared into the sky, the howling wind buffeting them. Below, the others advanced with eerie grace. The living host braced for the collision. Midnight inhaled deeply, flames building in its belly. With a roar that shook the heavens, the dragon unleashed a blaze so intense it momentarily turned the snow into steam. The front lines of whites disintegrated, husks and bones scattered by the fury of dragon fire. The White Walkers hissed, their blue eyes narrowing. A few brandished their ice blades, conjuring gusts of supernatural cold to deflect the fire. An unearthly battle ensued, flame against frost, each element roaring to dominate the other. Jon guided Midnight in sweeping arcs, bombarding the undead horde repeatedly. Some of the White Walkers began hurling spears crafted of ice, deadly shards that could kill a dragon if they found their mark. Midnight ducked and wove, agile for all its massive size. Steam and smoke mingled, the battlefield consumed by swirling blasts of heat and cold. On the ground, the living fought desperately. Stannis led a charge, his sword glinting with an odd red glow. Tormund and the wildlings met the whites in a savage clash. The air filled with screams, steel on ice, the sickening crunch of limbs. Melisandre cried out prayers, summoning flickers of flame in her hands, which cast back some of the darkness. But for every white they cut down, another rose. The White Walkers pressed in, slaying men with chilling, graceful movements, their blades slicing through steel as if it were parchment. Jon knew the outcome would hinge on whether they could slay the walkers themselves. He urged Midnight to dive once more, aiming for the largest cluster. The dragon's jaws opened wide, a column of flame bursting forth. One White Walker was immolated, shattering into icy shards, but others evaded or shielded themselves with swirling frost magic. Frustration churned in Jon's gut. He had to get closer. Midnight landed with a thunderous impact, the ground trembling beneath the dragon's weight. Jon leapt from the saddle, drawing Longclaw Valyrian steel, ancient and deadly to the others. Ghost bounded beside him, growling low. White Walkers advanced, their movements fluid and predatory. The first struck, its ice sword colliding with Longclaw in a burst of sparks. Jon felt the shock rattle his bones. Summoning all his will, he pressed forward, rotating his wrists to angle Longclaw in a savage arc. The White Walker hissed, stepping back. Jon's second blow caught it in the shoulder. The creature erupted into shards, dissolving into snow and wind. Another lunged. Ghost leapt at it, teeth bared. The direwolf was too quick, drawing the walker's focus as Jon slashed across its midsection. Again, the creature disintegrated. In the chaos, Jon glimpsed Stannis fighting another walker, but the king's sword was merely steel, and it shattered upon the enemy's blade. Tormund roared like a man possessed, hacking at whites. Men died left and right, but the press of the undead was immense. Midnight blasted them with fire, incinerating entire ranks, yet more kept coming, raised by the cold will of the others. Then came a horrifying moment. One of the others hurled a spear of ice with unnatural strength at Midnight. The dragon roared, twisting aside, but not fast enough. The spear struck Midnight's flank, embedding itself deeply. A gout of blackish-red blood spilled onto the snow, hissing with heat. Jon's heart lurched. He dashed to the dragon's side as it reared, flames sputtering, wounded and enraged. The White Walker who cast the spear approached with leisurely confidence, brandishing another. Jon knew if that second spear struck true, Midnight could perish. Without thinking, Jon dashed forward, Ghost at his heels. The walker turned its pale gaze on him. Jon braced Longclaw. They met in a flurry of blows. The ice spear whistled toward Jon's ribs. He twisted, parrying desperately. Every impact numbed his arms, and the cold radiating from the walker's body was like stepping into an Arctic sea. Ghost tried to flank, but the walker fainted, nearly impaling the direwolf. Rage flared in Jon's chest. He let out a cry and slashed with all his might. Longclaw bit into the walker's torso, slicing through the magical armor. With a piercing shriek, the creature exploded into a fine mist of ice. Jon wasted no time. He scrambled to Midnight's side. The dragon let out a ragged roar, shaking the ice spear loose. Blood poured, sizzling upon contact with the frozen ground. Jon pressed a hand against the wound as if he could stem the bleeding. Fly, he begged, though he knew Midnight might never leave him. Above, the sky raged with swirling storms. Another cluster of White Walkers advanced, taking advantage of the dragon's injury. At that moment, something stirred in the back of Jon's mind, an echo of ancient magic. He raised his face to the black sky. Then he reached out, pressing his palm against Midnight's neck. Dracarys, he whispered, the word coming unbidden, drawn from the lineage of Valyria. The effect was immediate. A surge of heat coursed through the dragon's body as if his voice ignited a deeper well of power. Midnight threw back its head, unleashed a torrent of flame more intense than ever before, a conflagration tinted with a strange purple hue that engulfed the entire front of the White Walker line. The blast was so bright Jon had to look away. He heard the others' shrieks, an eerie, resonant wail as dozens were consumed in Dragonfire. The ground quaked, ice cracking under the ferocious heat. When the flames died down, all that remained were piles of melting frost and scattered fragments of armor. A hush fell across the battlefield, broken only by labored breathing and the crackle of lingering fire. The whites that remained collapsed, lifeless once more, no longer animated by the will of their masters. It was over. The others had been destroyed, at least those who led this army. For several heartbeats, no one spoke. Then a ragged cheer arose from the survivors. They had done what no one believed possible. They had taken the fight to the heart of the other's domain and emerged victorious. Men sank to their knees, weeping. Tormund raised his axe and bellowed triumph. Stannis stood among the bodies, eyes wide in astonishment as if uncertain whether he or his red god had wrought this miracle. Melisandre stared at Jon and the dragon with an intense mixture of reverence and calculation. But Jon did not revel. He knelt by Midnight's side, pressing his EAD to the dragon's scaled flank. The wound was grievous. Blood still seeped slowly, though less than before. The beast breathed in ragged, pained gasps. Live, Jon whispered, voice choked. Please. He felt tears freeze on his cheeks. He could not lose Midnight, not after everything. Slowly, as if in answer to his plea, the dragon's breathing steadied. The enormous eye rolled to regard Jon, pupils contracting. The creature let out a low rumble, exhausted but alive. Jon closed his eyes, relief flooding him, though he did not know if the wound would ever fully heal. Men gathered around them, some with terror still etched on their faces, others with gratitude. It was in that moment that Jon Snow realized he was no longer simply a black-clad bastard. He was something else, something more, a savior of the realm in the eyes of many. The journey back was harrowing. They had to fashion a sled for midnight, pulled by the combined efforts of giant mules and a handful of men, as the dragon was too weak to fly at first. Day by day, the wound scabbed over, aided by poultices from wildling healers and, strangely, some fiery incantations from Melisandre. Jon never left the dragon's side. He fed midnight bits of the meager game they found, whispered encouragement. If the others had any more armies left, they did not show themselves, likely scattered by the death of so many White Walkers. Still, the Watchers felt uneasy, for the north remained a dark, unknown land. When at last they returned to Castle Black, a crowd gathered to greet them, among them Maester Aemon, who had listened to the news with trembling anticipation. He placed a wrinkled hand on Jon's shoulder, tears in his ancient eyes, and said only, "Well done, my boy." The men recounted the tale of how Jon Snow and his dragon had vanquished the greatest threat to the realm, how the others had been shattered, how the living had prevailed. It was a story that would spread through the 7 kingdoms like wildfire. In the south, the War of the 5 Kings was still raging, but the rumor of Jon Snow, the dragon rider of the north who had saved the realm, changed the balance of power. Rivals paused, uncertain what that might mean for their ambitions. The name Snow now carried a legend behind it. Yet Jon had no desire to play the Game of Thrones. He was a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn to protect the realms of men, and that vow still held true even if the immediate threat had been seemingly vanquished. But others had plans. Stannis, now flush with the glory of that victory, pressed his claim harder. He insisted the northern lords acknowledge him. Some did, seeing how Jon had allied with him. Others remained loyal to the king in the north, Robb Stark. Melisandre tried to lure Jon into supporting Stannis' cause, going so far as to declare that Lawler had chosen him. Jon resisted, polite but firm, reminding her that he had pledged his life to the wall, not a crown. For a time, there was a tenuous peace. The north rebuilt. The wildlings kept to their new settlements. The men of the Watch kept vigilant. And Midnight recovered, slowly but surely, to the point where he could fly again, albeit not as far. That calm proved short-lived. A raven arrived from King's Landing, bearing the royal seal of Joffrey Baratheon, or more accurately, the Lannisters. It demanded that the beast in the north be brought to heel. The letter dripped with threats, warnings that if Jon Snow did not bend the knee and deliver the dragon to the Iron Throne, the king's wrath would be swift. Mormont read it aloud, his expression grim. The men of the Watch laughed bitterly at the notion that any king could command them to relinquish the realm's greatest protector. But it was not only the Lannisters. From the east came word that Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, had learned of the Black Dragon in Westeros, a fearsome creature rumored to dwarf her own. She was said to be outraged, or odd reports varied. Some claimed she meant to cross the sea immediately and reclaim her birthright, forging an alliance with Jon Snow or perhaps demanding the dragon as her own. Others suggested she was determined to prove her children stronger. Whispers circulated that a new Targaryen civil war loomed. Jon found himself at the center of a storm he never asked for. Ambassadors from various factions arrived at the wall, each with their own agenda. Some offered bribes of land or titles if Jon would fly south and burn their enemies. Others threatened him if he did not comply. He listened politely, repeating that he was sworn to the Night's Watch. None had the authority to make him break those vows. Midnight sensed his turmoil, the dragon's mood shifting, tail lashing whenever strangers came near. Then, from the west, came news of King Robb Stark, who had won several victories against the Lannisters. He wrote to Jon, urging him to join the northern cause, promising to legitimize him as a Stark if he would fight by Robb's side. Jon felt the weight of that offer keenly. To be Jon Stark, recognized brother, no longer the bastard of Winterfell, and to fight for his family. The temptation tugged at his heart. But in the end, he remembered his vow. The Watch took no sides. As painful as it was, he sent a raven politely declining. All the while, the realm whispered his name, calling him Dragonlord, Conqueror, the one who might unify Westeros. At first, Jon dismissed such talk as foolish. He had no interest in conquest. The glory he earned was a grim necessity to defeat the others. But as the political tides shifted and winter deepened, it became clear that the 7 kingdoms bled themselves in pointless battles while the real threat, be it the remnants of the others or future catastrophes, lurked. If Westeros remained divided, it would never recover. The memory of the undead invasion would fade and the realm would be vulnerable again. Jon wrestled with these thoughts, uncertain of his role. But fate nudged him. Word arrived that another wave of whites had been spotted in the far north, perhaps remnants of the shattered army. Additional watchers had been lost beyond the wall. Mormont, ailing and weary, called Jon into his solar. The realm is fracturing, the Lord Commander murmured. We need unity. The living must stand together. Your dragon is the symbol that can unite them if anything can. He coughed into his fist, face pale. Jon, I see in you the makings of a king, though you wear no crown. I know your vow binds you, but the realm's vow to the Watch has long been forgotten. Perhaps it is time for something new. Jon listened, tormented. That night, he walked the ramparts of the wall, gazing down at the endless snows. Ghost followed, silent as always. Midnight perched nearby, a colossal silhouette against the moonlight. The dragon's gaze followed Jon's every movement as though reading his heart. In that moment, a realization dawned. The vow he had taken was to protect the realms of men. If men would not unite under their own leadership, perhaps he had to step beyond the traditions that bound him. The wall was not an end, it could be the beginning of something else, an era of guardianship for the entire realm if only he dared to claim it. He saw the path ahead. It was not about power or personal ambition, it was about forging peace, ensuring that no new nightmares rose to threaten men. To do that, he might need to become the very thing he never thought possible. He thought of Aegon the Conqueror, who had flown over the sea with his sisters and their dragons, uniting 6 kingdoms at first. A Targaryen tradition that once brought men to heel. Now Jon Snow, with a dragon said to rival Balerion himself, could perhaps unify the land once more. But what of Daenerys Targaryen, the rightful heir in the eyes of many, the mother of 3 dragons? And what of King Robb Stark, Jon's own brother by upbringing? Conflict seemed inevitable. Weeks of inner turmoil followed. Midnight grew restless, sensing Jon's indecision. Mormont's health declined. The realm continued to fracture. Finally, the impetus came in the form of a brutal letter. The Lannisters had demanded that the Watch surrender Jon Snow to King's Landing for treason, labeling him a pretender and a threat to the crown. They threatened to cut off supplies to the Watch to starve them. The letter was signed by Queen Regent Cersei on behalf of King Joffrey. Mormont spat in disgust, ripping the parchment. They will starve us all for the sake of their petty war, he said, shoulders slumped in defeat. Jon looked around at the men he had come to call brothers. The realm they had saved now spat on them. He thought of the innocents who would die if the Watch failed. And he made his choice. Summoning the entire Castle Black garrison, the wildlings who had joined them, and Stannis' remaining men, Jon climbed onto a raised platform in the courtyard. Midnight stood behind him, an awe-inspiring presence. The crowd fell silent, transfixed by the young man with the Valyrian steel sword and the monstrous dragon. Jon breathed in the cold air, exhaled a swirl of steam, and spoke. I was born a bastard with no name, he began, voice steady. My father, whoever he was, gave me nothing but a mystery. I joined the Night's Watch to do my duty, to protect the realms of men. We have done so at great cost, and we have seen how the South repays our sacrifice. They fracture, they war, they ignore the doom that nearly consumed us all. Now they would starve us for their own gain. He paused, scanning the upturned faces. The White Walkers may be broken, but winter remains, and men's hearts are as divided as ever. If we do nothing, we will be too weak to face the next threat that arises. The realm needs unity. The realm needs leadership, not from greed or birthright, but from necessity. If we do not take it upon ourselves to act, Westeros will remain in chaos until the next great horror destroys it. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Stannis stood with a clenched jaw. Tormund, arms crossed, nodded grudgingly. Sam Tarly listened, tears in his eyes, seeing his friend step into a role far beyond anything they had dreamed. Jon continued, voice growing stronger. I swore my life to the Night's Watch, and I would die for it. But I believe that vow compels me to protect this realm in whatever way I must. If that means becoming something else, a king, a conqueror, then so be it. But I will not do it alone, nor will I become another tyrant upon a throne of skulls. I want an alliance for the living. I want the North to stand with me, the wildlings to stand with me, any lord or lady who desires peace to stand with me. With the dragon's might, we can put an end to the petty kings and queens. We can demand a truce if not fealty, so that we might safeguard this land and ensure no new darkness rises unopposed. Silence. Then a roar of approval rose from many throats, though some remained uncertain. Stannis Baratheon stared daggers, offended by the notion that anyone but him should claim the throne. Melisandre watched Jon with a fiery intensity, perhaps believing her prophecies fulfilled. Tormund bellowed, I'll follow the crow with the dragon." The men of the Watch, who loved Jon for his bravery and loyalty, pounded their chests in agreement, though they had never sworn to follow a king. Mormont, too weak to stand, smiled faintly. A new era had dawned. Within days, letters and ravens spread across the land. Jon Snow, Warden of the North and rider of the Black Dragon known as Midnight, declared that the realm must unify. He would march south at the head of a combined force of Watchers, Wildlings, and Northern Lords who recognized his intent. He did not name himself king outright, but the message was clear. Resist and face Dragonfire. Comply and be part of a new peace. Some whispered it was a second conquest, though no Targaryen banner flew. Others said it was the will of the old gods and the new, that the bastard who saved the realm from the dead would now save it from itself. The move sparked an uproar. Robb Stark was stunned that his half-brother would do such a thing. The Lannisters howled in outrage, certain it was a plot to dethrone them. The Tyrells debated quietly, waiting to see which way the wind blew. Daenerys Targaryen, hearing the news from across the sea, was said to be furious and intrigued. She still intended to sail for Westeros with her 3 dragons to fulfill her birthright. But now another figure with Targaryen-like power had emerged. Some urged her to ally with him, others to destroy him. Yet, unstoppable as the march of winter, Jon Snow set forth. Midnight, though still recovering, took to the skies, a living banner of black wings and violet flame. Men flocked to his cause. Some for the sake of peace, others out of fear, many out of gratitude for the victory over the others. The battered remains of Stannis' force trailed behind, uncertain, for Stannis bristled under Jon's leadership. The wildlings followed Tormund. The Night's Watch remained in small garrisons at the wall but sent men to represent them in this campaign for unity. Step by step, kingdom by kingdom, the unstoppable force advanced. The lesser lords of the North bowed readily, for they respected Jon as a son of Ned Stark, or at least a fellow Northerner who had saved them from doom. Victories were swift. Whenever a holdfast resisted, Midnight flew overhead, unleashing a demonstration of Dragonfire that ended resistance in a heartbeat. Jon's terms were surprisingly lenient. Bend the knee to a unified realm, accept him as protector of the realm. He still shied from calling himself king, swear to uphold peace, or face annihilation. Few defied him once they saw the black wings blot out the sun. Behind him marched an army tempered by the coldest war imaginable. In time, he reached the Riverlands, where the rumor of his approach caused Walder Frey to panic. The old man tried to blockade the crossing, but the memory of the dire threat north of the wall was still fresh in men's minds. Houses that once might have sided with the Freys now feared the dragon more. Men deserted or swore fealty to Jon. The Freys found themselves isolated, and a single pass from Midnight above the twins was enough to bring them to submission. Stories spread of castle gates melted like candle wax under the dragon's breath. Robb Stark, hearing of Jon's unstoppable progress, sent envoys. A meeting was arranged. 2 armies pitched across a green field, banners snapping in the wind. Jon dismounted from Midnight, calling Ghost to heel, as Robb rode forward on a warhorse. The half-brothers regarded each other warily. Then Robb dismounted, embraced Jon fiercely, tears in his eyes. "You saved us all, and now you'd conquer the realm?" he asked, a mix of awe and disbelief in his voice. Jon's eyes shone with emotion. "I don't want to conquer. I want to end these wars. We have bigger enemies than each other. I pledge to protect the realm, and that's what I'm doing. If I must be a conqueror to save it, so be it. But I'd rather have you by my side." He extended a hand. Robb hesitated, then clasped it. "The North stands together," he said. "I will not fight you." The 2 men hugged again. Thousands of onlookers cheered. The wolf and the dragon were united at last. From there, the momentum built. House by house, region by region, lords chose submission over devastation. The Iron Islands attempted to raid, but their ships were set aflame by a single dragon's pass. The Tyrells, pragmatic and rich, recognized an unstoppable force when they saw one and threw open their gates. Dorne remained cautious, but word from the north of the heroic feats of this snow dragon softened their stance. And at last, King's Landing trembled. The Lannisters prepared for a siege, Joffrey ranting and raving about the bastard that dared challenge him. Yet, when Jon's forces arrived at the capital, the city gates were already in disarray. Cersei's hold on power had weakened. The small folk, hearing of the man who had slain the others and enforced peace across the war-ravaged land, stirred with hope. They hated Joffrey, hated the endless bloodshed. And so, when midnight flew low over the city walls, letting loose a roar that rattled windows, the gold cloaks abandoned their posts, throwing down arms to avoid the fate of Harrenhal. Within hours, the city had surrendered. Only the Red Keep remained, and Joffrey cowered behind his king's guard. Jon did not relish the confrontation. He landed within the courtyard, accompanied by Robb and a handful of knights. Joffrey greeted him with insults and shrieking threats, perched upon the Iron Throne. Cersei stood at his side, face pale. The men behind them were uncertain, glancing at each other. Then the walls shook with a roar from outside, midnight announcing his presence. Joffrey's bravado crumbled. Cersei tried to rally him, but he could not look away from the black shape looming in the sky. At last, the king's guard parted. Jaime Lannister, face conflicted, allowed Jon and Robb to approach. Joffrey screamed for them to stop, but no one moved. The boy king was left alone on the Iron Throne, trembling. Jon halted a few feet away, recalling all the horror that this boy and his family had inflicted. Then he spoke quietly, his tone devoid of malice. "Your reign is ended. The realm has suffered enough. Step down and you may live." Joffrey spat, hand shaking on the hilt of a dagger. Cersei pulled at his arm, urging him to yield, but the boy had always been half-mad with pride. He lunged at Jon. Jaime cursed, trying to intervene. The dagger never struck. Robb caught Joffrey's wrist and with a quick motion disarmed him. The boy collapsed, sobbing and shrieking, accusing them of treason. No one listened. The next day, the city roared with cheers as Joffrey was deposed, locked away in the black cells. Many demanded his head, but Jon decreed that there had been enough executions. He left Joffrey's fate to a council of lords who would likely strip him of all titles and keep him imprisoned. And so it was that the Iron Throne passed into Jon Snow's hands, not through desire, but through the unstoppable might of a dragon and the support of a realm longing for peace. Men called him the Dragon of the North, the Lord Protector, the Black Conqueror. He took no joy in the title. The swords of the throne pressed coldly against him as he tentatively sat upon it. Robb stood at his side, uncomfortably. The lords and ladies of the realm knelt or bowed, acknowledging that they were beaten or perhaps relieved. For the first time in living memory, the entire realm was at peace under a single ruler, bound by fear and respect of the black dragon that had grown larger than any living creature. Midnight perched on a massive reconstructed dome near the Red Keep, too large for any stable. Any who doubted Jon's power had only to glance at the sky. In the weeks that followed, Daenerys Targaryen's fleet landed in Dorne, her 3 dragons circling overhead. Many feared another war, but Jon flew south to meet her, ironically as Aegon once flew to meet King Torrhen Stark. Instead of waging war, however, Jon proposed an alliance. Their blood was not so different after all. And while Daenerys burned with a desire to reclaim the throne of her ancestors, seeing midnight in the sky, so immense that even Drogon seemed small, gave her pause. She listened to Jon's tales of the others, of the war that nearly ended humanity. After many tense negotiations, the 2 Targaryen heirs, unaware of their secret kinship, found a fragile peace. The realm, battered by countless wars, had no appetite for further destruction. Though Daenerys had claimed she was the rightful queen, she could sense that destiny had chosen Jon as well. She chose to stand beside him, forging a new Targaryen-Stark alliance that might lead to a golden age of dragons or a stable reformation of the realm. Thus, the realm was conquered yet saved by the bastard of Winterfell and his colossal dragon, Midnight. Jon Snow ascended to power not as a tyrant but as a guardian, with the purpose of preventing further devastation, whether from men or the undead. The 7 kingdoms slowly healed, turning to the tasks of rebuilding roads, feeding the hungry, fortifying the wall anew. The Night's Watch, no longer neglected, gained new recruits and resources, a shining example of what unity could achieve. Of course, no peace lasts forever in the lands of ice and fire. New threats would someday emerge, new intrigues and betrayals. The Targaryen blood within Jon might lead to conflict with Daenerys' designs or with the old lords who questioned the rule of a bastard. But for now, for a shining moment, the land knew stability under a wise and reluctant conqueror who commanded the largest dragons since Balerion, if not larger. And in the hush of the Red Keep's courtyard each dawn, Jon would walk to where midnight slept, press a hand against those ancient scales, and whisper words of gratitude. Their bond remained unbreakable, forged in frost and tempered in fire. Together, they had conquered the realm, yet neither believed conquest was the end of their duty. It was but a beginning, a chance to shape a peaceful future for all who called Westeros home. And so the realm, in its tapestry of shifting allegiances and grand destinies, beheld the rise of Jon Snow, no longer just a nameless bastard but a conqueror crowned by the might of a dragon, uniting men in the face of winter's darkest shadows. May the songs remember him not just as the dragon of the north, but as the guardian who, against all odds, saved the realm from annihilation and then chose mercy over cruelty, peace over endless war. The quiet words of the Watch's oath echoed through time, etched in hearts across the land. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. Indeed, Jon Snow became that shield, and the mighty black dragon above was his unbreakable blade. Word of the accord between Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen swept across the Seven Kingdoms as swiftly as a raven's wing. Even so, the news arrived in many places as something near impossible. The dragon rider of the north, crowned by fire and victory, had joined forces with the mother of dragons, who for years had been rumored to gather power beyond the narrow sea. Some lords rejoiced, trusting that two proven saviors might preserve the hard-won peace. Others only saw a merging of threats, a bastard-turned conqueror with the mightiest dragon in the world at his beck and a Targaryen queen commanding three more. Whispers of old prophecies and new calamities fused into an undercurrent of unease. King's Landing, for the moment, remained uncharacteristically calm under Jon Snow's stewardship. Once lavish feasts were replaced by simple, carefully rationed meals in the Red Keep's Great Hall, for the city was still recovering from years of war and the Lannister regime's excesses. The small folk who had watched dragons circle their skies and seen knights and kings come and go were both fearful and hopeful. Jon, never one to relish grandeur, had begun reorganizing the capital's affairs with efficient sternness. He delegated many tasks to loyal men and women who had proven themselves during the War for the Dawn and the subsequent unification. Yet he could not quell the sense that every decision left him more entangled in a game he'd once scorned. Robb Stark spent his days in the city overseeing the re-establishment of northern law and customs for those northerners who had marched south. He and Jon clashed with polite restraint over small matters, punishments for treacherous lords, the distribution of provisions, but they always found common ground. Though King Robb had once declared the North free, the tide of events had made him see that keeping Westeros fractured would only sow seeds for more chaos. The unspoken truth hung between them, they had both lost so much. Now, for the good of all, the Starks must stand with the Targaryen power that Jon embodied, even if it was half a birthright, half a mystery. In the crowded throne room, the Iron Throne glimmered in the shifting daylight that slanted through high windows. Jon hated that seat of melted swords, though he tried not to show it. He preferred to stand at its base when hearing petitions, keeping the twisted steel behind him like a living shadow. The small council, reformed from remnants of various houses, included men like Davos Seaworth, reluctant to serve any king but mindful of the realm's needs, and a handful of others who had proven themselves uncorrupted or at least pragmatic. Melisandre lingered at the edges of these gatherings, silent, her red robes conspicuous among the drab blacks and grays. She watched Jon with an inscrutable intensity, as though reading flames dancing over him that none but she could see. Yet if King's Landing was subdued, the approach of Daenerys Targaryen from Dorne sparked fervor across the land. She traveled with her armies along a southern route, her three dragons, Drogon, Regal, and Viserion, scouting the skies. Lordly courtesy compelled her to accept invitations at each major castle so she might assert her claim to the Targaryen heritage. In Sunspear, she was welcomed by Prince Doran Martell's household with a guarded kindness. At Starfall, she admired the Dornish coasts and accepted tribute from House Dane. Along the way, she freed what few slaves remained in secret corners, enforcing her vow that no bondage would exist where her rule extended. Gradually, she moved northward until her scouts informed her that King's Landing had thrown open its gates for her. And so she came, carried in litters or astride silver mares, with the Unsullied marching in disciplined formation. When at last Daenerys arrived at the city's southern outskirts, crowds gathered, uncertain but curious. She rode at the head of her procession, her silver-gold hair shining in the midday sun. Drogon beat the air above her, casting a sweeping shadow across the fields outside the walls. The City Watch, newly restructured under the command of men chosen for loyalty rather than coin, kept the peace. Within the walls, tension spiked. People remembered the war against Cersei, the tensions with the Lannisters, the abrupt downfall of King Joffrey. That chaos was still fresh. Jon heard the horns announcing her approach from his seat in the old council chambers. Glancing around at his advisors, he saw caution in each face. Robb's brow furrowed. He wanted to stand beside his half-brother when Daenerys arrived, yet he mistrusted Targaryens by old reflex. Davos looked torn. Stannis' memory haunted him, but the new queen had a reputation for mercy that inspired him. Tyrion Lannister, recently returned to King's Landing under a subtle truce, appeared uneasy at the prospect of confronting his own sister's former seat of power, but he had joined Daenerys some time ago and believed in her capacity to rule. In the end, Jon decided the greeting should be a display of unity, not intimidation. He summoned no massive formations of soldiers, no demonstration of weaponry. He mounted his horse, wore no crown, for he despised the notion, and rode out with Robb, Davos, Samwell Tarly, and a retinue of watchers and loyal men. Midnight did not accompany him. Jon wished to avoid a spectacle of two monstrous dragons glaring at each other over the city's rooftops. He left the black beast in the broad yard behind the Red Keep, where it basked in the sun, half dozing, half alert. They met Daenerys a league south of the city gate. She reined in her mare at the sight of them, studying Jon with a thoughtful intensity that might have seemed cold if not for the flicker of curiosity in her violet eyes. She wore travel leathers, practical but finely made, her hair braided in a distinctively Valyrian style. In the sky, Drogon circled, followed by the smaller forms of Regal and Viserion. Jon dismounted and offered a curt bow, neither groveling nor discourteous. Daenerys regarded him in silence for a moment before nodding in return. Her gaze flickered to Robb Stark, who stood tall, auburn hair stirring in the breeze. Introductions were made with careful courtesy. Jon welcomed her as a fellow ruler who had shown him respect, and she acknowledged him as the man who had saved Westeros from the White Walkers. Tyrion, standing at Daenerys' side, offered a wry half-smile at the irony, a Lannister returning to King's Landing to see a Targaryen welcomed by a Snow. From that moment, the city braced for tension. But Daenerys entered King's Landing not as a conqueror, not after hearing what had transpired, that Jon had already ended the wars, broken the Lannisters' hold on the throne, and offered the realm unity. Indeed, the two Targaryen heirs were forging a bond that no one had anticipated. In the Great Hall, she stood by Jon, gazing up at the Iron Throne with a wistful sense of longing. The seat of her ancestors loomed like a question. Was she to sit upon it as the rightful queen, or was it now another seat? Jon gestured for her to ascend, should she wish. Yet Daenerys only looked at him and shook her head, quietly remarking that they would find another way to govern, a way that might not require the monstrous symbol of conquest. Their exchange sent a ripple through the Watchers, many of whom saw the first spark of a partnership that might transcend the strife of previous centuries. Days passed. Daenerys took up residence in the old royal apartments, ironically the same spaces once used by Cersei. She met with lords, heard from small folk, recognized the dire state of the city's grain stores. She and Jon spent long hours in discussion with Robb Stark, Davos, Tyrion, and other key counselors, attempting to devise a system that might keep the peace across the realm. Daenerys shared her experience in Meereen, how she had wrestled with establishing order after toppling cruel masters. Jon spoke of the Night's Watch, a brotherhood structured by oath. Both recognized the realm was vast and varied, and forging a stable government that satisfied all would not be done in a fortnight. All the while, Daenerys' dragons roost outside the city walls, near the Blackwater Rush. King's Landing had not seen multiple dragons since the reign of the old Targaryen kings. The small folk gawked or hid behind shutters, depending on their temperament. Traders crowded the markets, hawking Targaryen tokens and black dragon pennants that combined the stark dire wolf with a stylized dragon's head, trying to profit from the new era. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep's broad yard, midnight sprawled in the sun, watchful of the horizon. Occasionally, the three Targaryen dragons flew overhead. Whenever Drogon circled too close, Midnight lifted his gargantuan head and rumbled as though to remind the younger beast who was mightier. Drogon, bold as he was, never quite engaged in a challenge. It was as if he sensed the older dragon's raw power. Regal and Viserion kept their distance, content to let the largest of their kin have pride of place. During one of these days, Jon attempted to see if the dragons might share the skies peaceably. He mounted Midnight's flank, beckoning Daenerys to fly with him. She agreed, but with her usual caution where Drogon was concerned. Mounting her black-scaled, red-fringed draconic steed, she kicked off from a clearing outside the gate, and together they soared above King's Landing. Midnight's wingspan eclipsed Drogon's by a noticeable margin, though Drogon was no small creature. For a breathless hour, they drifted in broad circles, the wind whistling past them, the city sprawling below. The watchers on the walls collectively held their breath, half in terror, half in awe. Two dragons, side by side, each ridden by a figure of prophecy and rumor. It was the stuff of songs, and yet no fire lit the sky that day. The beasts simply roared to announce their dominion, then landed in separate spaces, each swirling dust across the stones. When Daenerys dismounted, her cheeks were flushed, eyes bright. She looked at Jon, who slid from Midnight's saddle, and for a moment, she said nothing. She seemed on the verge of laughter or tears. "They said Balerion was the largest that ever lived," she murmured. "But your dragon, I could almost swear Midnight rivals that legend." Jon offered a small nod, acknowledging he had heard the same. He had no pride in it, merely a sense of responsibility, as if the realm's fate hinged on each wingbeat. In private, Daenerys spoke her worries. "Your presence here is momentous, Jon Snow. You ended a war that would have consumed the world. But that war's legacy might yet devour us if we cannot steer this realm together. So many houses warred over crowns. They may resent that we simply arrived and said peace or face dragons." Jon understood all too well. He recalled how the Targaryens had taken Westeros centuries past, forging an empire by fire. His approach, though equally unstoppable, had cost fewer lives overall, but the principle was the same: subjugation by fear. He told Daenerys he wished to transition from fear into something more lasting: respect, compromise, the chance for lords to govern their regions so long as they upheld the peace. Still, no matter how earnestly they shaped their policies, not all were content with the new order. Far in the west, Euron Greyjoy had seized Pike, styling himself king of the Iron Islands after Balon's death. He had no patience for talk of unity or realm-wide peace. He thrived on chaos, seemingly unafraid of dragons. He boasted he would make a gift of Jon Snow's head to the drowned god. From Old Town arrived news of strange raids along the coasts. The Faith, reorganizing after the downfall of the High Sparrow, murmured about abominations and demanded a reckoning for the free folk who had settled in parts of the north. In the Reach, some lesser lords grumbled that a Stark bastard king had usurped the Targaryen line, ignoring Daenerys' presence. And in the east, rumors spoke of sellswords amassing under new banners, though no one knew precisely who funded them. Jon realized that uniting a fractured realm under a single banner was but the first step. Keeping it united would be far more difficult. Even among his closest allies, tensions simmered. One afternoon, while Daenerys and Robb Stark exchanged pointed words about the North's freedom, Davos sat quietly to the side, face drawn. Melisandre hovered near a brazier, not speaking. At last, Daenerys insisted that Robb not flout the Iron Throne's authority by raising northern taxes beyond reason. Robb, prickly about anything that might diminish the North's sovereignty, retorted that without the North's sacrifices, the realm would have perished under the dead. Jon intervened, trying to calm both, but the argument left an uneasy hush behind. It was a small matter in truth, yet it symbolized the fractures that could widen. Afterward, Daenerys caught Jon alone. "Your brother's loyalty is to you first, not to me," she said softly. "And I see how it burdens you. You're pulled between the North and the entire kingdom. I know the feeling well. Meereen taught me how quickly freedmen could resent my rule if they felt overlooked." She paused, considering him with those keen violet eyes. "We have so much in common, you and I. Both of us shaped by exile, by battles no one else believed in. Now the realm calls us conquerors." Jon exhaled, leaning against a window embrasure. "I never wanted to conquer. I wanted to protect. If the realm stands united, I don't care who wears a crown, truly I don't. But people look to me or fear me because of Midnight. Some even whisper that if you and I were to unite in marriage, the realm would accept a single royal house. But I know you have every right to claim the throne yourself." A faint smile touched Daenerys' lips. "I've heard the same whispers. Some say it would settle the question of rightful rule once and for all, the Targaryen queen, the dragon-riding king who saved the realm. But do we want that? Would it truly bring peace, or only further resentment?" She touched the stone windowsill, gazing toward the city. "There's another matter. You claim you're no Targaryen, only a Snow, but old legends swirl about your birth." The mention made Jon stiffen. He had heard these rumors, he tried to ignore them. Yet Sam had uncovered partial truths in the Night's Watch records, references to Rhaegar Targaryen's secret marriage to Lyanna Stark. Bran Stark, who had begun to awaken strange powers as a Green Seer in the North, had sent cryptic messages suggesting Jon was no bastard at all. Jon had doubted, resisted the notion. He had so long believed he was Ned Stark's shame. The possibility that he was Ned's nephew instead, the son of the Crown Prince, unsettled him. It was not a prospect he desired. He would have been content never to speak of it again, but Daenerys' words made it clear the subject could not remain hidden. When he did not respond, Daenerys sighed. I don't know if it's true. But if it is, then you stand as my nephew by blood, for Regal was my brother. It would make you a Targaryen. Aegon, some say, was the name. No doubt that complicates everything further. Jon's throat felt tight. If it's true, I grew up never knowing it. I have no longing to be called Aegon or to claim that lineage. I'm a Stark in my heart. I took an oath to the Night's Watch. But fate might have other plans. Daenerys nodded thoughtfully, resting a hand lightly on his forearm. Then we face it together. Let the truth come as it may. The realm sees us as the twin pillars of a new age, whatever the truth behind your birth. Yet even as they reached this fragile accord, events beyond the city walls forced their hand. A raven arrived from the west, bearing the sigil of House Hightower. Lord Leighton Hightower, some called him the Old Man of Old Town, warned of a fleet of reavers that had descended upon the arbor, sacking ships laden with wine. The lords of the Reach implored Jon and Daenerys to defend them, to destroy the Ironborn threat once and for all. In the same missive, rumors spoke of Euron Greyjoy capturing a strange artifact from Essos, a horn rumored to bind dragons. The letter's accuracy was uncertain, but it raised immediate alarm. If Euron truly possessed something that could wrest control of dragons or even kill them, the realm faced a new, terrifying threat. Jon called the small council to debate. Most agreed that ignoring Euron would only embolden him. The arbor was crucial to the Reach's trade. Tyrion, knowledgeable about arcane lore, insisted that this Dragonbinder horn was likely a half-myth. Yet the possibility that it was real could not be dismissed. Daenerys clenched her jaw, recalling the slavers who had once tried to claim her dragons in Essos. If Euron has some vile weapon, I want it seized or destroyed, she declared. We cannot let the Ironborn menace the coasts unchallenged. That night, Jon ventured to the Red Keep's yard to see how midnight fared. Torches burned in braziers, casting dancing shadows across the black stones. The dragon sprawled near the far wall, making the fortress look puny by comparison. Midnight's injury from the Spear of Ice had long since healed, leaving only a jagged scar across one flank. Whenever Jon approached, the dragon stirred, lifting its massive head, letting out a deep rumble. Jon pressed a hand against Midnight's warm scales, feeling the thunderous heartbeat. Bene. I'm sorry we must fight again, Jon murmured, thinking of the confrontation with Euron. But to keep peace, it seems we must quench every new threat that rises. Ghost, at Jon's side, sniffed the air and whined softly. Something about the night felt charged, electric. Jon glanced around. The yard was empty but for a lone figure near the gate, Melisandre. The Red Woman's gaze was fixed on the dragon, her eyes glittering in the torchlight. She stepped closer, gliding across the cobblestones with an eerie grace. You bear the burden of kingship heavily, Jon Snow. Jon did not look away from the dragon's flank. I've never asked for it. No. You were chosen. By the people, by the realms, by the flames, by the old gods. Take your pick of which is true. It scarcely matters now. She brushed a hand along Midnight's scaled forearm, though the dragon hissed softly, not quite allowing her touch. Stannis believed himself Azor, a High Reborn, but perhaps he was only a stepping stone in the Lord of Light's plan. The war against the Long Night was won because of you and the dragon you ride. Perhaps you are the prince that was promised, or perhaps you fulfill another prophecy altogether. You are the Lightbringer that stands against the darkness. Jon scowled, though quietly. I'm no champion of Lawler or any god. I only do what must be done. That is often how prophecy works. In Dorne, in Old Valyria, in Ass High, where I come from, we have studied such legends. The fires show me that your trials are not ended. The sea will darken, storms will rage, and an iron serpent will rise with false flames in its jaws. You must be ready. Jon's unease sharpened. He wondered if the iron serpent was Euron Greyjoy. I'm doing all I can, he said, voice firm. Melisandre inclined her head. I know. Then she turned and walked away, the hem of her red gown sweeping across the stones. Her words left an unsettling sense of doom in the back of Jon's mind. Soon after, preparations for war proceeded. Though Jon and Daenerys hoped to avoid more bloodshed, Euron's raids demanded response. Ships were gathered from the royal fleet, what few remained after the wars, and from loyal houses along the coast. Daenerys' forces included the remnants of her own fleet that had once ferried her from Essos, bolstered by new ships commissioned in King's Landing. The goal, sail west, confront Euron's Ironborn, and either force them to heel or annihilate them before the rumored horn could be used. This time, Jon did not intend to join the naval battle at sea. Dragons disliked open water, and he had no experience commanding fleets. Daenerys would sail with Tyrion, Grey Worm, and much of her army. She would bring Drogon, Regal, and Viserion to harry the Ironborn ships from above. Meanwhile, Jon would remain in King's Landing with a portion of their combined forces to keep order and to guard against any opportunistic rebellion. But as the fleet prepared to depart, a gnawing worry tugged at him. He did not trust Euron Greyjoy in the slightest. The man was rumored to dabble in dark sorceries. If the horn was more than a tale, it could threaten the dragons in an unprecedented way. So, on the morning Daenerys was to set sail, Jon found her on the deck of her flagship inspecting the rigging. The sun was rising behind the city's spires, gilding the masts with pale light. She turned at his approach, her expression resolute. "We'll return triumphant," she said in greeting, as though reading his doubts. "Drogon will not fall to some ragged piece of myth." "I hope you're right," Jon replied quietly. He placed a hand on her arm, stepping aside so none of the crew overheard. "But remember, if there is danger beyond what you expect, send a raven. Or a messenger by sea if you must. Midnight and I can be there faster than any ship. Promise me you won't let pride endanger yourself or your dragons." Her eyes flickered with mild offense, then softened. "I've learned caution, Jon Snow. I lost one dragon in the far north before we even met. Viserion was slain by the Night King, though Lawler saw fit to return him. Trust that I won't repeat mistakes. And if a call for help comes, I will welcome your arrival." Jon nodded, relief slipping through him. "Travel safely," he murmured. Daenerys offered him a faint smile, then turned to bark orders at the crew. Sails unfurled, lines were cast off, and the fleet eased from the harbor. Daenerys's dragons took wing, silhouettes against the goldening sky. The city awoke to the thunder of their passage, men and women staring upward in a mixture of reverence and dread. For the next several days, King's Landing held its breath. Jon occupied himself with the mundane affairs that multiplied daily, ensuring shipments of grain arrived from the Reach, hearing grievances between merchants, mediating tensions between newly arrived free folk and local lords suspicious of them. Robb, used to a battlefield, found the capital's politics grating, but he assisted where he could. Sansa arrived from the north not long after, escorted by a company of soldiers carrying the dire wolf banner. She was older now, tempered by her experiences in the Vale and the north. Her reunion with Jon was tearful, and she eyed the Iron Throne with a careful, knowing distance. "You never should have had to bear this alone," she told Jon. "I'll help however I can." And so the days lengthened, a lull in the realm's endless strife, until a ragged galley limped into Blackwater Bay, flying the banner of House Beesbury. Its sailors stumbled onto the docks with horrific tales. The Ironborn had clashed with the royal fleet near the Shield Islands. At first, Daenerys's forces looked certain of victory, with dragons scouring ships. But Euron himself commanded a monstrous vessel bristling with scorpion-like ballistae. And in the thick of the fight, a horn was blown. A sound so bone-shaking that even men on distant ships felt their teeth rattle. The dragons in the sky roared, as if in agony. Regal had plunged from the clouds, thrashing uncontrollably, and Viserion reeled as though disoriented. Tyrion had screamed for the men to row away. Drogon still responded to Daenerys, but the others were half-maddened by the horn's clarion. Under that chaos, the Ironborn inflicted heavy losses, sinking several of the royal ships and scattering the rest. The messenger did not know the final outcome. He had fled amidst the chaos, seeing Regal crash onto a distant beach, wounded. Jon listened, feeling a chill more profound than any northern wind. If Euron could indeed warp the minds of dragons, then Daenerys and her forces were in grave peril. He wasted no time. Summoning Robb, Davos, and Sansa, he announced his intention. He would ride midnight westward, using the dragon's incredible size and speed to locate the fleet and intervene. Sansa, though afraid for him, agreed the risk was necessary. Robb insisted on marching an army behind him, but Jon shook his head. "We have no time to coordinate. By the time you reach the coast, if the battle has turned, it may be too late. A dragon can fly in a day what takes an army weeks." So Jon prepared, donning black leathers and a lighter set of armor that would not impede him while airborne. He checked the saddles and harness meticulously. Ghost whined at his heels, sensing the tension. The courtyard thrummed with anxious watchers in black cloaks, men from the north, city guards, all aware that their king was taking to the sky for another battle. Some knelt as if in prayer. Jon gave one long look at Sansa, who pressed her lips tight, tears shining in her eyes. Then he climbed up Midnight's side with practiced ease. The dragon stirred, spreading wings so massive they stretched beyond the yard's perimeter. A single thunderous beat lifted them into the air. Dust swirled, men staggered back, the city's roofs dropped away below. King's Landing shrank beneath them, and Jon urged Midnight west, chasing the horizon where the sun sank each evening. For 2 days they flew across fields and rivers, resting briefly at dawn and dusk. Jon slept in short, fitful stretches beside the dragon, using a cloak for warmth. Midnight hunted deer or wild cattle to keep his immense hunger sated. Each hour, Jon's mind churned with worry for Daenerys and her dragons. The distance was vast, but Midnight's speed dwarfed that of any horse or ship. They soared above the Kingswood, then the rolling hills of the Reach, eventually sighting the Mander glinting below. Smoke smudged the sky near the coast, confirming the rumored site of the battle. At midday on the second day, Jon saw the sea. The salty tank stung his nose from high above. The water was dotted with debris, drifting timbers, half-burnt hulls. Beyond lay a scattering of islands, low and green. Among them, black-sailed ships prowled, iron-born. Jon guided Midnight lower, scanning for Daenerys' fleet. He spotted clusters of battered vessels flying Targaryen flags or the crowned stag and flaming heart of Stannis' old supporters that had merged into Daenerys' cause. But they were scattered. Some were anchored near a beach, and on that sand lay a monstrous shape of greenish-brown scales. Regal. The dragon was immobile, wounded. Men scurried around him like ants. Rage roiled within Jon. The next moment, he spotted Euron's flagship cutting across the water. A monstrous prow shaped like a leviathan. Catapults and ballistae jutted from its decks. A single mast bore the Kraken sigil on a black field. Jon's blood pounded in his ears as he searched for a glimpse of Daenerys or Drogon. Then he saw it. Further out to sea, a swirl of black wings and orange flame. Drogon was locked in a deadly dance with iron-born scorpions, swooping low to blast the ships. But something was off. Drogon's flight appeared erratic, as if buffeted by unseen forces. Jon spotted an iron-born crewman on one of the lesser vessels raising a massive horn, swirling with Valyrian glyphs. The man's cheeks puffed, and a terrible call reverberated across the waves. Midnight flinched mid-flight, letting out a guttural roar that shook Jon in the saddle. He felt a sharp pang, as if a knife had twisted behind his eyes, and the dragon wobbled. Heart hammering, Jon patted Midnight's neck, trying to calm him. "Steady, boy," he hissed. "They're using that cursed horn on us. We must destroy it." Midnight, though shaken, responded to Jon's voice. His wings steadied, though the dragon's eyes rolled, pupils narrowing in confusion. Another blast of that infernal horn rang out. This time, Drogon shrieked somewhere over the sea, flames sputtering. Jon grit his teeth and pulled on the reins, steering Midnight into a sharp dive. The wind howled around them as they aimed directly for the ship carrying the horn. He glimpsed iron-born men gesturing frantically, loading bolts into scorpions. Then everything blurred in a rush of air. Midnight exhaled a savage torrent of flame. The deck exploded into a hail of sparks and flying timbers. The scorpion crews died screaming, and the hornbearer fell beneath the flames, the artifact plummeting into the sea, or so Jon hoped. Freed of that vessel, Midnight soared upward again. But the main threat, Euron's flagship, was not idle. Jon saw the massive ballista pivot. Euron himself stood at the prow, bellowing orders, clad in dark, salt-stained finery. A grin split his face as he spotted the black dragon overhead. Another man raised a second horn, smaller but etched with the same twisted runes. Jon's heart lurched. There was more than one? The man blew, and the call reverberated. Midnight shuddered violently, wings half-folding. Jon clung to the harness, fighting for control. He felt a sudden wave of dread, as if the horn's note lanced directly into his mind. Midnight roared in pain or confusion, losing altitude. Then, from the corner of his vision, Jon saw a streak of black and red. Drogon. Daenerys, risking everything, had seen the hornbearer too. She guided Drogon in a savage dive, flame erupting from the dragon's jaws. The flames engulfed the foredeck of Euron's ship. Men scrambled in terror. The hornblower collapsed and the horn cracked with a sickening pop. But Euron had fired his ballista a moment earlier. Jon watched in horror as a giant iron bolt, whistling through the air, struck Drogon's shoulder. The dragon let out a deafening shriek. Daenerys barely clung to the saddle as Drogon wavered, losing altitude. Jon's fury boiled over. He spurred Midnight forward, ignoring the pain and confusion roiling through the dragon's link. With a mighty gust of wings, Midnight soared in behind Drogon, who was now flapping wildly to gain height despite the bolt lodged in his flesh. Euron's men hastily reloaded. The next shot might kill Drogon or Daenerys if she was thrown from the saddle. Midnight roared, the sound like boulders grinding. He unleashed a jet of violet-tinged flame so intense it split the ship's stern. The mast crashed sideways, rigging ablaze. The deck erupted into chaos. Euron's triumphant grin twisted into a snarl, and he dove for cover. By the time the smoke cleared, Euron's flagship was listing sharply, flames dancing along its rails. The ballista was ruined, and many Ironborn were leaping overboard to escape the flames. Midnight circled overhead, chest heaving, while Drogon struggled to remain aloft, blood trickling from his wound. Jon saw Daenerys hunched against Drogon's neck, holding on with one arm, her hair flying in disarray. Their eyes locked across the smoky distance. Jon gestured for her to head to shore. She nodded, guiding Drogon toward the beach where Regal lay. Viserion, battered but still flying, swooped in to finish off the scattered Ironborn ships, belching greenish flame that set the waves alight with weird reflections. Euron's vessel, still ablaze, threatened to sink. Jon considered letting the entire crew burn, but something compelled him to end this here and now. With a firm tug on Midnight's reins, he spiraled down. The deck was a ruin of splintered planks, cinders, and screaming men. Euron Greyjoy stood near the prow, clutching a red-stained axe, his fine coat smoking. He glared up at the massive black dragon. Jon leapt from the saddle onto the tilting deck, sword in hand, ignoring the intense heat. Midnight perched behind him, wings half furled, roaring at any Ironborn who dared approach. The deck pitched wildly, water sloshing in. Euron laughed, a crazed, desperate sound. The great conqueror come to face me in a blazing tomb. He hacked at a piece of burning rigging, clearing space, his one good eye gleaming with madness. I've tasted the secrets of the world, snow-drunk shade of the evening in the ruins of Valyria, stolen the winds of Sithorios. A demon in the shape of a man, that's me. You think your dragon can save you? He spat in defiance. Jon approached slowly, flames dancing around them. Lay down your arms. End this. Euron bellowed a curse and lunged. Swinging his axe in a brutal arc, Jon parried with long claw, the clash jarring his arms. The deck swayed, half submerged at one end. Euron pressed close, face contorted. He swung again, forcing Jon back a step, but Jon had fought others in an icy hell. A drowning ship was hardly worse. He sidestepped, letting Euron's blow sink into the smoking wood. With a fluid motion, Jon slashed across Euron's ribs. The Ironborn staggered, blood blooming through his scorched coat. Still, he refused to yield, roaring like a wounded bear. Around them, the flames crackled, water lapped, and the ship sank lower. Midnight growled menacingly, but Jon waved the dragon off. This fight, he sensed, needed to be finished by his own hand. Euron launched himself in one last burst of savage energy, axe whirling for Jon's neck. Jon ducked, hammered his pommel into Euron's jaw, and as the pirate reeled, delivered a thrust that sank Longclaw into his chest. Euron's eyes went wide, a final grin twisting his lips. "The drowned god take you," he croaked, then crumpled. Jon wrenched his sword free, swallowing a bitter taste. Around him, the deck was nearly awash. The hull groaned. Men were jumping into the sea. With a shout, Jon scrambled back to Midnight. The dragon crouched low, letting Jon climb the harness. With powerful wing beats, Midnight rose from the doomed flagship's deck. Below, the last of the Ironborn that stayed loyal to Euron sank or floundered, the ship cracking under the weight of water and flame. The gray sea swallowed the wreck, a swirl of smoke trailing after. Jon, panting, guided Midnight to the shore where Daenerys had landed. Dozens of battered soldiers, sailors, and Dothraki survivors milled about. Regal lay in the shallows, hissing in pain as some men attempted to remove a scorpion bolt from his flank. Drogon perched further inland, one wing drooping but otherwise defiant. Daenerys dismounted, stumbling forward to greet Jon. Their eyes flicked over each other's injuries, relief pulsing through them. No words passed for an instant. Then Daenerys let out a shaky laugh. "He's dead." Jon nodded. "Yes, Euron's done." She closed her eyes in gratitude, exhaling a heavy breath. "So the horn? Destroyed or sunk at least." There might have been more, but I saw two. We ended them both, Jon replied, noticing how the sound of that cursed horn still echoed in his memory. We'll have to scour the Iron Islands to be sure. Daenerys swallowed, then smiled faintly. We will, and we'll rebuild what was lost. Her gaze drifted to Regal, who let out a low moan as men applied hot irons to cauterize his wound. The cost is high, but we're alive, and the Ironborn threat is finished. Over the next days, they tended to the wounded dragons, gathered survivors, and brought the scattered fleet to anchor. Many Ironborn surrendered once they learned of Euron's death, though pockets of reavers still lurked among the islands. Daenerys used Drogon's might, while Jon assisted with Midnight to enforce the new peace, an ultimatum of bend the knee or burn. Most submitted, others fled. In time, the realm might pacify the Iron Islands for good, though no one could fully tame the Ironborn spirit. When at last the battered fleet set sail to return to King's Landing, their victory felt real. Daenerys had proven her leadership in battle, Jon had confronted Euron himself, and the cost, though heavy, had not been as cataclysmic as it might have been. The horns that threatened dragons were lost to the deep. Even so, the memory of that sound haunted them, proof that dark magic persisted in the corners of the world. Westeros might never truly be safe, no matter how many foes they defeated. They reached King's Landing to cheers from the city's walls. Word of their victory had arrived ahead of them. Sansa, Robb, and the other Stark bannermen waited at the docks, relief plain in their faces. Jon embraced them both. They saw the bloodstains on his tunic, the lines of exhaustion in his face. Yet he stood unbowed, a testament to the vow that had led him so far. Daenerys, though wearied, rode beside him with quiet pride. They traveled up to the Red Keep together, forming an image that the realm's bards would weave into ballads for decades. Two dragon riders, Stark siblings, the armies of men unified. That evening, a council of lords, knights, and counselors convened in the throne room to celebrate the victory and plan the final subjugation of the Iron Islands. Many voices rose in praise of Daenerys and Jon both. Some demanded the official crowning of them as co-rulers. Others insisted that the King of the North remain distinct, while Daenerys took the Iron Throne. Still others clamored for a wedding, believing it would quell any dispute over claims. Tyrion, standing behind Daenerys, rolled his eyes at the fervor. He and Sansa exchanged knowing glances, old wounds and alliances set aside for the moment. Jon stood quietly near the base of the Iron Throne, letting the shouts wash over him. Daenerys glanced at him, then raised a hand for silence. The hall quieted, all eyes on her. She spoke with a firm voice, echoing across the columns of melted swords. Lords and ladies, free folk and watchers, we have ended another threat. Euron Greyjoy's dark ambitions have been vanquished. We have proven that with unity we can secure peace for our people. But this is only the beginning of rebuilding the realm. Thousands are hungry, homes are ruined by war. We must see to them first. Let us bring prosperity, not just conquest. A cheer rose, though some voices were subdued. Then Daenerys looked to Jon. He sighed and stepped forward, scanning the hall. We can't rely on war after war to hold these kingdoms together. I believe we must craft new laws and compacts to ensure each region's freedoms while upholding the greater peace. The North, the Reach, the Vale, the Iron Islands, Dorne, the Crownlands, no one region can stand alone forever. We will form a council of lords from each region to settle disputes, so bloodshed is the last resort. Some nodded enthusiastically, others frowned, uncertain. But there was no immediate dissent. Jon continued, as for who sits the throne, I've said before, I don't care for a crown. A tumult of voices interrupted. Some cried that he was the realm's savior, others insisted on Daenerys' birthright. Daenerys raised a hand again, silencing them. She exchanged a meaningful glance with Jon, as if acknowledging that this question would not be easily settled by a simple refusal. The people wanted stability, and that often came from a figurehead or a monarch, a symbol of unity. It was Tyrion who spoke then, clearing his throat. Your Graces, let us be frank. We are in a unique position. The realm has, for the first time in generations, two Targaryen heirs, though one is rumored, one is proven. We have the Stark family, whose loyalty is beyond question, now intimately tied to the Targaryens through alliances and shared battles. The dragons themselves are bound to both. Might I propose that rather than a single occupant of the Iron Throne, we consider a joint monarchy, King Jon and Queen Daenerys ruling as partners? A hush fell. Some looked intrigued, others scandalized. Robb frowned slightly, though Sansa pressed her lips, perhaps seeing the logic. Daenerys studied Jon's profile. He, in turn, stared at the Iron Throne as though it might bite him. Words tumbled in his mind: Rhaegar, Lyanna, oaths, duty, prophecy. He felt the weight of them pressing down. Finally, he said quietly, if that is what it takes to keep the realm at peace, if the people and the lords consent, and if Daenerys consents, then I will abide by it. But do not mistake me, I seek no personal glory. Daenerys's face was unreadable for a moment. Then she inclined her head, that faint, determined smile touching her lips. I accept, on the condition that we forge a system of governance that ensures each region's voice is heard. Let the realm prosper, not cower. A rousing shout rose among many in the hall, though a few remained uncertain. All the same, it was a step toward forging a permanent shape for the realm's new era. Tyrion beamed, the corners of his mouth curling with satisfaction. Davos dipped his head, muttering that he hoped the gods would bless such a union. Melisandre, silent behind a pillar, watched with an enigmatic tilt of her head, perhaps seeing a step closer to whatever destiny the flames revealed. That night, the Red Keep overflowed with talk of the upcoming official coronation or ceremony of union. People thronged the corridors, gossiping about the unstoppable might of two dragon riders. In a quiet moment, Jon escaped to the castle ramparts, seeking a breath of night air. The city sprawled below, lanterns glittering like fallen stars. The sea beyond shimmered with ghostly silver. He rested his hands on the stone parapet, letting the breeze wash over him. Ghost hovered at his side, ears perked. He heard the soft tread of footsteps behind him. Turning, he found Daenerys approaching, a cloak draped over her shoulders. She paused, regarding him under the moonlight. You're fleeing your own victory celebration? I needed some air, he admitted. Every corner of that hall wants answers. How to handle rebellious lords, how to manage trade routes, who marries whom to secure alliances. My head pounds. She stepped closer, arms crossed gently over her chest, as if to brace against the breeze. You're not alone in that, but at least we stand together, for whatever that is worth. He looked at her, the flicker of torchlight from a lower courtyard illuminating her silver hair in glints of copper and gold. Memories of the battle, of Euron's horn, of her near fall, churned in him. He recalled how his heart had seized when Drogon was struck, how he'd soared to her rescue with no thought but to save her. In the hush, something unspoken sparked between them. They were not simply allies or co-rulers. The bond they shared went deeper, forged in battle and mutual sacrifice. And perhaps, in the faint whisper of Targaryen blood that united them by fate, if indeed the rumors of Jon's parentage were true. She let out a soft breath, a wry half-laugh. I spent so long striving to reach this city, to take back what was stolen from my family. But standing here, I realize it was never about a throne made of swords. It was about ensuring people didn't suffer the way I did, the way my ancestors did. You've done the same in your own way. Jon nodded, gaze drifting. All I ever wanted was to protect people from the horrors I saw beyond the wall, to make sure no one else lost what I lost. Now I'm to be king or half a king, whether I will it or not. Daenerys considered him a moment, then reached for his hand, twining her fingers gently with his. If we can share the burden, perhaps it won't be so heavy. Her words were quiet, earnest. But let us do more than share that burden. Let us make something better. He held her gaze. A flicker of warmth lit his chest, a sense of something akin to hope. The notion of forging a new peace, hand in hand with this fierce, compassionate woman who had walked through fire and come out stronger. It stirred a corner of his soul he had closed off since his earliest heartbreaks. Slowly, he nodded. They stood there a while, the city quiet below them, the black sky overhead pricked with stars. Ghost settled by Jon's feet, watchful yet calm. In the weeks that followed, preparations took shape for an official ceremony that the bards called a coronation, but in truth was more a union of houses and powers. Lords from across Westeros streamed into the capital. The North sent a large delegation, led by the Stark siblings. The Vale arrived under Lord Royce, the Stormlands under a scion of House Baratheon who had pledged to Daenerys. Even Dorne sent representatives, curious if the new regime would uphold their autonomy. Some lords grumbled at the expense of traveling, but the chance to witness the forging of a new monarchy was too great a historic moment to miss. Highgarden's resources helped decorate the Red Keep's once ransacked halls. Flowers, silks, and gleaming torches lined the corridors, transforming the castle into something reminiscent of a far gentler reign. The Great Hall, where the Iron Throne loomed, was draped with banners. The Stark direwolf, the Targaryen three-headed dragon, and a new device that combined black wings with the direwolf's head. Word spread that Regal and Viserion were nearly healed from their wounds. The presence of 4 dragons in the city, Midnight, Drogon, Regal, and Viserion, terrified many, but the fear was balanced by the hope that none would dare challenge such formidable protectors. On the appointed day, the lords and ladies crowded into the throne room. Jon, wearing black and silver, stood on one side with the Stark party. Robb, Sansa, Arya, who had returned from her own wanderings, pale-faced and subdued but ferociously loyal, and Bran, whose strange, distant eyes seemed to see too many truths at once. Daenerys, in pale red and gold, stood on the other side with Tyrion, Grey Worm, Melisandre, and others who had followed her across the sea. The hall bristled with silent tension. Melisandre lingered in the shadows near a brazier, lips moving in silent prayer. Davos and Sam waited near the dais, anxious and hopeful. Grand Maester Ambrose, who had come from Old Town specifically for this event, stepped forward with solemnity. He carried a simple crown of Valyrian steel and another of silver set with rubies. Clearing his throat, he spoke to the assembled crowd. "We gather here on this day to witness the union of 2 powers who have saved the realm from the long night and from its own divisions. Let all see that King Jon, who took the black, who wields the sword in the darkness, and Queen Daenerys, last scion of House Targaryen, stand before you to forge a reign of unity." Jon swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of hundreds bearing down on him. Daenerys showed a calm facade, though tension thrummed in her posture. The old maester turned to Daenerys first, reciting the lineage of the Targaryens, her titles, Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, though he abbreviated them for brevity. She bent her head, and Ambrose placed the silver crown upon her brow. Then he turned to Jon, who had no grand list of titles, only the name the realm called him by: King in the North, the Dragon of the North, the Bastion against the Dead. Ambrose set the Valyrian steel circlet on Jon's dark curls. A hush fell. Daenerys faced Jon, taking his hand before all those witnessing. Sansa and Tyrion exchanged a small, ironic smile. In a voice that carried through the hall, Daenerys spoke, "I do solemnly swear, before gods old and new, to join my rule with yours, so that no threat shall undo the realm we have saved together." Jon's throat felt tight. He remembered the vows he once spoke before the Heart Tree to serve the Night's Watch until death. But perhaps this vow was an extension of that service in a way. "I vow to stand beside you, Daenerys Targaryen, for the good of Westeros," he said, voice steady. "Let our rule protect all who dwell in these lands from the darkness that lurks beyond, whether it be mortal or monstrous." The maester stepped back, proclaiming, "Behold your king and queen, united in purpose and rule." Applause and cheers rose, though not without pockets of silence from those who felt uneasy. Horns blared. Men hammered sword hilts on shields. Ghosts barked once from the back of the hall. Daenerys smiled, relief mingling with resolve. Jon glanced at her, sharing that weight of responsibility. He had never imagined he would wear a crown. Yet here he stood, a black circlet glinting in his hair, with the entire realm's fortunes pivoting upon his choices. That night, feasting and revelry swirled through the city. Wine flowed, minstrels sang ballads of the war for the dawn, of Euron's downfall, even of the Targaryens of old. Arya watched from a corner, occasionally sipping ale and smirking at the posturing lords. Robb was at the center of a throng, laughing with Dothraki warriors who had adapted surprisingly well to Westerosi feasts. Sansa presided over a group of ladies, ensuring civility. Bran spoke quietly with Sam, exchanging cryptic references to the future and the past. Daenerys and Jon, freed from some of the formalities, found themselves momentarily alone on a balcony overlooking the yard. Below, the dragons dozed or soared in arcs above the city, visible by torch and moonlight. Daenerys let out a long breath, resting a hand on the balcony rail. "I never thought to share my throne, but I see now it's the only way." Jon nodded, glancing down at the yard. Midnight was perched near a tall watchtower, gazing over the city as though it belonged to him alone. Drogon crouched on a far battlement, watchful of his rider. "Unity is fragile," Jon murmured. "We'll need to guard it as fiercely as we guarded the wall." She looked at him, the flicker of torchlight dancing in her violet eyes. "Together we might just manage it. If not, at least we'll fall side by side." He couldn't help a rueful half-smile. "I've died once before. I prefer not to do so again." Her laugh, soft and genuine, eased the tension in his chest. In that moment, they were not king and queen, but two weary souls who had fought impossible battles. He lifted a hand to brush a silver lock from her cheek, and for a heartbeat, he thought of pressing his lips to hers. She seemed to sense it, leaning in slightly. Then footsteps sounded behind them, and the moment passed. Grey Worm approached, bowing to deliver a missive from the Stormlands, and they returned to the swirl of obligations. As the days turned into weeks, the new monarchy sought to prove it was more than a show. Jon assigned Robb as Warden of the North with full authority, trusting he would manage northern affairs better than any distant king in King's Landing. Daenerys reorganized the Crownlands, ensuring that lords who had suffered under Joffrey's tyranny received compensation. Together, they formed the new council that included representatives from each region. Tyrion served as Hand of the Queen and King, though the official title varied. Davos became Master of Ships, overseeing the reconstruction of a royal navy battered by years of conflict. Sansa chose to remain in King's Landing for a time, advising on diplomatic matters. Arya soon grew restless, departing on a mission of her own, though she offered no details as to its nature. Bran spoke rarely, lost in visions, yet occasionally gave cryptic advice that proved invaluable. The combined presence of 4 dragons kept would-be rebels silent. Even so, not all corners of the realm embraced the new rule. In the Riverlands, the Freys simmered with resentment, seeing their power reduced. In Dorne, a fraction of the nobles felt that a Targaryen and Stark monarchy was still a form of foreign rule. Far beyond the seas, powers in Essos eyed Westeros's dragons with envy or dread. Yet, for the first time in decades, the 7 kingdoms were largely at peace. Roads reopened, trade flourished, harvests improved. People dared to hope. Winter was not over, but it mellowed, as if the land itself recognized the shift in fortune. Snow still fell in the north, but travelers could move without constant fear of the dead. The days and nights took on a steady rhythm in King's Landing. Jon and Daenerys each had their duties. He often rose early to inspect fortifications or drilling soldiers, while she spent long hours in councils with ambassadors, forging treaties that might outlive them. By twilight, they would reconvene in the Great Hall or the courtyard, sometimes making time to simply speak as friends. A tenuous closeness grew between them, though the demands of rule rarely left them truly alone. It was on one such evening, months into their joint reign, that the stillness was broken. A raven arrived, bearing the sigil of House Reed from the neck. Mira Reed had sent word of an ancient ruin uncovered by the receding waters in the swamps. She claimed to have found carvings that bore the sign of the Children of the Forest, along with something that spoke of a last darkness yet to come. The letter was vague but urgent. She begged for her father, Howland Reed, to meet with the king and queen and share secrets he had long held regarding Jon's parentage. The letter concluded with a single cryptic phrase: "The knowledge belongs to Rhaegar's son, so he may guard us from the final storm." Jon read it in silence, Daenerys peering over his shoulder. A swirl of dread and curiosity coiled in his gut. Howland Reed was the only living man who had stood with Ned Stark at the Tower of Joy, aside from the vanished Arthur Dayne. If he carried knowledge that confirmed Jon's parentage beyond doubt, that confirmation might have seismic consequences. Daenerys's face was a careful mask, but he saw worry glint in her eyes. If he truly was Rhaegar's legitimate heir, it meant his claim to the Iron Throne surpassed hers by the laws of inheritance. Would that shatter their alliance or deepen it? They dispatched ravens at once, inviting Lord Reed to King's Landing. Bran, informed of the letter, only said that he had known this moment would come. Robb responded from Winterfell urging caution, that secrets might do more harm than good. Tyrion and Sansa debated the political ramifications. Daenerys insisted that truth was better than rumor, though she dreaded the potential rift. Jon felt the weight of the entire realm on his shoulders once again. But something deeper whispered inside him, that he owed it to Ned Stark's memory, and to Lyanna, if indeed she was his mother, to know. When Howland Reed finally arrived weeks later, it was almost anticlimactic. He was a small, quiet man, carrying the musk of the bogs and a lifetime of secrets in his eyes. He knelt before Jon and Daenerys in the throne room, ignoring the stares of courtiers. After some formalities, Jon led him to a private solar, accompanied by Daenerys, Sansa, and Bran. There, Lord Reed spoke of the Tower of Joy, of Rhaegar's secret marriage to Lyanna Stark. He recounted how Ned had promised Lyanna he would protect her son's identity, for fear Robert Baratheon would kill any Targaryen heirs. How Ned had claimed Jon as his own bastard to keep him safe. He pulled from his satchel a tattered piece of parchment bearing a marriage record from a secret ceremony in Dorne. The scrawled signatures included that of the High Septon who had performed the rite, plus Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. As Reed spoke, tears gathered in Sansa's eyes, thinking of the father who had borne such a burden. Daenerys listened, pale but composed. Bran, leaning heavily on his staff, confirmed it with a calm, strange certainty. "I have seen it in my visions," he said simply. "You are Aegon Targaryen, born of ice and fire." Jon sat in numb stillness, the parchment in his hands. It all made sense, and yet it changed everything. For decades he had believed himself unworthy, an outcast in his own family. Now he realized the father he'd revered was not truly his father, but his uncle. His mother was the sister of the man he had called brother, and his real father was the Silver Prince who died on the Trident. When at last he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "I never wanted this. I don't want to overthrow a..." Daenerys cut him off, placing a hand on his arm. "You fought for the realm. You brought us all together. This knowledge doesn't change that. I have seen how you bear the burdens of kingship. If your claim is stronger than mine by law, I will not be your enemy. We stand as equals, do we not?" A faint tremble laced her words, but her eyes were resolute. Sansa let out a shaky exhale as though bracing for an argument, but none came from Daenerys. Bran said softly, "We are all part of the same story. The realm needs you both." The solar fell silent. Jon, near overwhelmed, let the parchment slip from his fingers. Perhaps, in another age, this revelation would spark a new civil war, a fresh dance of dragons. But Daenerys' presence at his side, her hand still on his arm, suggested a different path. He took a slow breath, letting the storm in his mind settle. "This changes nothing about our duty," he said at last, voice steadier. "We rule together. We protect the realm. I have no intention of casting aside the vows I've made. Let the realm call me Jon Snow or Aegon Targaryen. It makes no difference. My mother, my father, they wanted me to live, that is all. I will honor them by upholding what we've built." Sansa closed her eyes, relief washing over her. Daenerys' fingers tightened gently on Jon's sleeve. "Then we keep building," she whispered. "We keep protecting." A swirl of emotions played across her face, too many to name. Sadness, relief, perhaps a glimmer of contentment that the truth, at last, was known without tearing them apart. Lord Reed bowed his head. "My part is done. The secrets are yours to wield or conceal." In the days that followed, they chose a path of partial disclosure. The small council learned that Jon Snow was indeed son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, but would remain Jon Snow in name, co-ruler with Daenerys Targaryen. The realm at large heard only rumors, scattered by gossip, not a formal proclamation. The new monarchy carried on. Some whispered that a second dance of dragons loomed, but no such conflict materialized. Jon and Daenerys continued to appear side by side, forging treaties and punishing outlaws, hosting joint audiences in the throne room. Gradually, the realm accepted that whatever name he was born with, Jon Snow was still the same man who had saved them from the dead, from Euron, from chaos. Thus did Westeros settle into a fragile golden age. The arrival of spring, slow and uncertain, began to thaw even the north. Crops sprouted in fields once ravaged by war. The roads, made safe by patrolling knights loyal to the new monarchy, thrived with merchants. The free folk in the north integrated further, forging ties with northerners who once saw them as enemies. Hardhome was resettled, with shipments of grain and tools from King's Landing ensuring no repeat of the old tragedies. In the far corners of the continent, outlaws and brigands still lurked, but with 4 dragons roaming the skies at times, few dared test the new order for long. Jon and Daenerys found a measure of peace in their unusual partnership, though the demands of rule kept them busy. They often took morning rides together on their dragons, surveying the countryside. Sometimes, they soared over the sprawl of King's Landing, marveling at how quickly the city recovered from years of strife. At other times, they tested the boundaries of their dragon's territory, pushing beyond the Crownlands to ensure no pockets of rebellion threatened. Their bond, both political and personal, deepened. On one such dawn, they flew out to the salt-worn battlements near the sea, letting Drogon and Midnight circle overhead, their roars echoing across the crashing waves. Alone for a moment on a stretch of pale sand, they talked quietly of the realm's future, of the children they might one day have, if that was fate's design. Daenerys confided that she once believed she could not bear children, a curse from Mirri Maz Duur. But she had begun to wonder if that might have changed now, as so many other impossibilities had changed. Jon squeezed her hand, uncertain but hopeful. They were forging a story beyond the old tragedies, or so they prayed. Still, even in peace, the shadow of the White Walkers lingered in memory, the knowledge that dark powers existed in the world. Melisandre vanished one night, leaving only a note that read, "My part is done. The Lord of Light has no more need of me in this realm." Whether she traveled east or simply disappeared into the shadows, no one knew. Bran Stark continued to have visions, sometimes warning of flickers of darkness in far lands or stirrings beneath the ruins of Valyria. Each time, Jon and Daenerys resolved to remain vigilant. The realm would never again be caught unprepared for supernatural threats, not while dragons soared in its skies and watchers stood guard. Years might pass, and bards would sing of the age of King Jon and Queen Daenerys, the twin dragons who ended the long night, subdued the Iron Islands, and united a broken land. In their songs, they would speak of the Black Dragon, Midnight, larger than any since Balerion, and how it dwarfed even Drogon, Regal, and Viserion when they soared together. They would tell of a reluctant king, born a bastard but proved a prince, and a queen forged in fire, each bound to a shared destiny. And though no peace is everlasting, for a time at least, the realm knew prosperity and hope. Standing on the balcony of the Red Keep, looking out over the sunrise gilding the city, Jon Snow, a man once called a bastard of Winterfell, a brother of the Night's Watch, a savior against the dead, felt Daenerys' hand slip into his. He heard the distant roar of dragons and the bustling hum of a city awakening to a new day. He thought of Ned Stark, of Lyanna, of Rhaegar, of every life lost to bring him here. He remembered his vow to guard the realms of men. Now he did so not just from threats beyond the wall, but from within the hearts of the kingdom itself. Yet for all the burdens, a kernel of warmth spread in his chest. They had overcome the greatest darkness known to man. They had united houses once locked in blood feuds. They had begun the delicate task of mending a kingdom long sundered by mistrust. And side by side, they would continue that labor, forging a realm that might stand strong against any future terror. No longer alone in the cold, Jon Snow had found purpose, kinship, and something close to love. Perhaps that was all any man could hope for in a world of ice and fire. And so, with the golden light streaming over them and the thunder of dragons in the sky, the king and queen faced the dawn, ready to carve their legacy into the annals of Westeros, together, unbroken and unafraid. Time never halted in Westeros, even though there were moments when the realm seemed to rest in a fragile stasis. At sunrise one crisp morning, the city awoke as usual, fishmongers hawking their wares along the Blackwater, vendors rolling open the shutters of their cramped shops, the clang of distant forges echoing across the rooftops. Yet within the Red Keep's highest tower, King Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen, though he seldom answered to that name, stood at a narrow window, quietly thinking of the future. Dawns like these reminded him of the first light he had seen beyond the wall years ago, when he was only a boy in black struggling to protect a realm that barely knew him. He hadn't slept well. His mind churned with half-remembered dreams. Glimpses of his mother, Lyanna, whispering his name. Fleeting images of Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident. Ned Stark's voice echoing in the Godswood at Winterfell. The knowledge of his parentage had settled inside him like a new heartbeat, constant, undeniable, but no longer as sharp as a fresh wound. Daenerys, too, had come to terms with it more easily than he ever expected. They had quietly agreed that the truth would remain only half-whispered among a trusted few, so that the realm would not be stirred anew by talk of which Targaryen had the better claim. Together they had formed a government that the people accepted, if not wholeheartedly, then at least without open rebellion. The scars of war were still healing, but they were healing nonetheless. He left the tower, descending the stone steps with Ghost padding softly at his heels. The corridors smelled of fresh rushes and candle wax. Servants bustled about, carrying trays of bread and fruit to the kitchens. Some bowed or curtsied as Jon passed. He offered them small nods, though the gestures still felt foreign. In his chest, he carried memories of the boy who once ate with the men of the Night's Watch, who had no titles at all. Now he wore a black circlet of Valyrian steel, small enough to be unobtrusive but marking him all the same. Jon paused near a side door leading to the courtyard. Morning sunlight poured in, warm against the chill of the stone halls. Ghost slipped out first, muzzle lifted as if sniffing for fresh scents. Beyond the gates, the city stretched in winding alleys and red-tiled roofs. From this vantage, Jon caught a glimpse of the wide yard where two of Daenerys's dragons, Regal and Viserion, reclined in lazy coils. They had recovered from the wounds left by Euron Greyjoy's scorpions, though Regal's hide still bore faint scars. Further off, near the outer walls, stood the hulking shape of Midnight, massive as a moving mountain of black scales, overshadowing even the largest courtyard in the Red Keep. Some men joked that the castle was no longer for humans but for beasts of legend. Others believed the dragons were a sign of prosperity, that the Targaryen blood and the Stark sense of duty would usher in an era free of pointless wars. Jon dared to hope they might be right. He stepped outside, letting the bright air cleanse his thoughts. Guards bowed stiffly. Some wore the Stark direwolf on their cloaks. Others bore the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen. Most had begun to display a combined sigil that merged the two, a black direwolf's head on a field of red flame, or else a single direwolf curled around a dragon silhouette. None of these were official banners, but the men wore them to display loyalty to the joint monarchy that had ended the long night. Jon stopped to run a hand along Midnight's scaled forelimb. The dragon let out a low rumble, blinking a sulfur yellow eye in recognition. A swirl of warmth emanated from the creature's breath, faintly sulphurous but not unpleasant. Sometimes Jon found himself marveling that once upon a time he had found this dragon near death in the frozen wastes. Now Midnight was the mightiest living beast the realm had seen since Balerion the Black Dread. More than once, the sight of him had broken an enemy's resolve before a single arrow was loosed. In the yard, several figures awaited him. Ser Davos Seaworth, master of ships, wore a practical doublet embroidered with a ship's wheel. Grey Worm stood by Daenerys's Unsullied, exchanging a few words with the city guards in curt, halting common tongue. And Tyrion Lannister, the hand to both king and queen, was fiddling with a parchment while wearing an expression of deep thought. At their heads stood Daenerys Targaryen, the silver in her braided hair catching the sun. She wore a close-fitted riding cloak of pale gray, small rubies pinned at her throat. She turned at Jon's approach, a slight smile warming her face. "Ready for another day of staving off chaos, your grace?" Tyrion asked, half-mocking. He turned to Daenerys. "And you, your grace, are you prepared as well?" Daenerys arched an eyebrow. "The realm has never run short of chaos," she replied, but her smile did not waver. She looked at Jon. "I was about to see if you were still Abed. Sometimes you vanish at dawn to train in the yard or to watch the city from the ramparts." "I woke with the crows," Jon said, glancing at the sky. "I take it we have a council meeting?" Tyrion tapped the parchment. "Lord Edmure Tully has arrived from Riverrun, and we have an envoy from Dorne waiting in the Great Hall. Also, a Braavosi banker has come by ship hoping to negotiate better trade terms. I suspect they smell the realm's recent stability like sharks scenting blood in water. They want coin, or the security to ensure they'll get it." Daenerys nodded. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting." She hesitated, gaze drifting to Midnight, who flicked his tail lazily. "Will you join me in the throne room?" Jon inclined his head. "Give me a moment to see that Ghost is fed. I'll meet you there." She touched his arm, a brief, warm gesture. Then she turned, followed by Grey Worm and Tyrion, leaving Davos to linger. The old smuggler rubbed his hands together. "Well, your grace, it's the life we chose," he said, as if reading Jon's mind. "Or the life that chose us." Jon managed a small smile. "So it is. Let's see how many lords we can placate today." They moved inside, navigating corridors thick with courtiers and visitors. The Great Hall had been redecorated modestly since the days of the Lannisters, with fewer golden lions and more banners that showed the unification of houses. Word of the day's meeting had spread, so a small throng of onlookers clustered around the throne room's doors. Guards ushered them aside as Jon, Davos, and others approached. Inside, the Iron Throne rose from the dais like a gnarled monument to conquest. Jon hated it. He would rather stand than sit on that twisted seat of melted swords. But Daenerys ascended the steps anyway, taking her place with measured grace. The heads of houses already assembled bowed or curtsied. Robb Stark stood to one side of the dais, speaking quietly to Sansa. Her red hair was pinned up in a style reminiscent of their mother, Catelyn Tully. Bran lurked behind them in a wheeled chair, his eyes distant as if seeing worlds beyond the present one. Arya was nowhere to be seen. She rarely attended these formal gatherings, preferring to slip in and out of the capital on errands of her own. Tyrion, as hand, cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. Servants brought in the day's petitioners. First was Lord Edmure Tully, who approached with a relieved smile. He offered proper courtesies, then explained the reason for his visit. The Riverlands had endured flooding the past spring and entire villages needed relief. Bandits still roamed the edges of war-torn roads. He proposed the crown finance repairs to critical bridges and provide small garrisons to keep outlaws at bay. Daenerys listened carefully, then looked to Jon. "What say you, my king? Do we have the men to spare for the Riverlands?" Jon caught Robb's eye. Robb nodded once. "Many from the north have returned home, but we can spare a few hundred men, those who served loyally in the wars and now want to see the realm's roads safe." Tyrion tapped his quill on his parchment. "We can also raise coin from the crown's funds, thanks to recent trade expansions. Enough to finance repairs, at least for the most critical sections of the Trident." Edmure exhaled, gratitude shining on his face. "You have my thanks, your graces. The people of the Riverlands will not forget your generosity." Daenerys nodded. "See that it's used wisely. Our resources are not infinite." She gestured for the next petitioner while Sansa took Edmure aside to discuss details. Next came the Dornish envoy, two women in flowing orange silks wearing black veils that concealed their faces. They introduced themselves as Sisters of House Corgyle, speaking on behalf of the Lords of Dorne. Tensions had flared between their territory and the crown over taxes on Dornish wines. They insisted the new monarchy reduce the tariffs that had been imposed during Joffrey's reign. Tyrion exchanged a glance with Daenerys. Jon remembered how the Dornish had always been fiercely independent. He addressed the sisters, explaining that the monarchy was willing to negotiate fairer terms, but that Dorne would be expected to contribute men or resources to realm-wide projects if a new threat emerged. One sister arched a brow, evidently skeptical. "We have no love for kings in the south," she said in a lilting accent, "but we have seen your dragons in the sky, and we know the threat you ended beyond the wall. We will consider your proposals." Bowing stiffly, the sisters withdrew. A hush lingered as Tyrion announced the final major matter. The Braavosi banker, a representative of the Iron Bank, had come to request an audience. A tall, thin man in a dark velvet doublet stepped forward, bowing with clipped politeness. The Iron Bank, he explained, was prepared to lend a substantial sum of gold in exchange for certain privileges, most notably favorable trade treaties and rights to establish a Braavosi counting house in King's Landing. The realm's coffers were not empty, but a secure line of credit could finance the rebuilding of roads, ships, and new harbors. Daenerys listened with measured calm. She knew well how dangerous the Iron Bank's influence could be. Jon felt a subtle tension in the hall. The Lannisters once commanded the crown's debts, and that had nearly undone the realm. They did not want to place Westeros at the mercy of foreign bankers again. Tyrion questioned the Braavosi at length, pressing for lower interest rates. The banker's face remained impassive, though now and then a flicker of calculation shone through. In the end, they agreed to table the matter for further negotiation. The man bowed again, stepping back to let others approach with lesser grievances. Thus the morning wore on, a flurry of talk about coin, treaties, resources, and the delicate balancing act of leadership. Jon found himself glancing at Daenerys whenever a new petition arose, marveling at how smoothly she handled the intricacies of court after all she had endured in Essos. She, in turn, often caught his eye, seeking his support with a look. Together, they navigated these waters as best they could, forging compromise after compromise to keep the peace. The demands were relentless, but it was better than hearing horns at the gates or whites clawing at the walls. When at last the formal session ended, the crowd dispersed in waves. Jon and Daenerys retreated with Tyrion and Davos to a smaller council chamber for a midday meal. Robb trailed after them with Sansa, who looked relieved to have a chance to speak informally. They settled around a polished oaken table where servants brought bread, cheese, olives, and fresh grapes from the Reach. Wine was poured, though Jon took only a small cup. He had never been overly fond of the sour vintages from the Crownlands. He found himself drifting into thought. Sansa spoke first, addressing Robb. Uncle Edmure asked if I might spend some time in Riverrun to oversee the distribution of supplies. He trusts my advice. It wouldn't be for long, maybe a fortnight or two. Will you need me here in King's Landing? Robb shook his head. I can manage well enough. But you know, if you go, there are always new concerns. The capital changes by the day. Tyrion, seated across from them, smirked gently. You could bring me along, Lady Sansa. I have fond memories of the Riverlands. Though some might say otherwise. Sansa shot him a measured look, then allowed a faint smile. The tension of their past had mellowed over time. They were neither enemies nor close confidants, but the realm's trials had forced them to coexist. Perhaps it would be good for you to see more of the place than a wedding fiasco, she replied, earning a soft chuckle from Tyrion. Daenerys turned to Davos. You said the Arbor's new ships are near completion? Aye, your grace, Davos replied between bites of bread. The Red Wine fleet is finishing a half-dozen war galleys to bolster our navy. Should be ready within the season if the weather stays fair. Daenerys nodded, and her expression drifted to Jon, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. He felt her eyes on him and cleared his throat. We've grown quite used to quiet since Euron's defeat, but we should keep watch on the seas. The free cities might see an opportunity to meddle if they sense our guard slipping. Tyrion spread his hands. Indeed, Braavos alone has a formidable fleet, and the others, Volantis, Pentos, aren't lacking in cunning. We can't underestimate them, especially with so many dragons perched on our ramparts. They may fear us, or they may conspire to tame or kill what they fear. His gaze flicked to Daenerys. We saw how that ended for Euron Greyjoy, but the Eastern powers have deeper pockets and fewer scruples about hiring sails, or worse. Davos dabbed his lips with a napkin. I keep hearing rumors from traders about turmoil in Slaver's Bay. Even though Daenerys freed those cities, new forces might try to reassert old ways. The Golden Company, perhaps? Or some new mercenary band? Daenerys' face tightened. I will never let them retake Slaver's Bay. But I cannot be in two places, once. My armies remain here to secure Westeros. Sansa sipped her wine thoughtfully. We could send an envoy or two to Astapor, Yunkai, Meereen, just to confirm the situation. Remind them that you still watch. Daenerys nodded slowly. Yes. Grey Worm's men will be well received there. Though, I worry the freedmen might lose heart if they don't see a show of strength. Jon placed a hand gently on hers, feeling the tension in her posture. We'll find a way. One battle at a time. She met his eyes, gratitude flickering across her features. Then she looked down at the table, letting a calmness settle over them. Robb, noticing the lull, shifted the conversation to lighter matters, how the training yards were thriving with knights from every corner of the realm, how the small folk seemed less afraid now that the monarchy had stabilized. For a short time, they spoke in friendlier tones, remembering that not every moment of life had to be an unending crisis. The next day dawned bright and clear, but before noon, a storm gathered off the coast, buffeting King's Landing with whistling winds and sharp rain. Daenerys had planned to fly Drogon beyond the city walls and check on farmland near Rosby, but the sudden gale forced her to wait. She was not the only one chafing at the weather. Dozens of visitors huddled in the castle's outer wards, waiting for the rain to ease so they could depart. The wet flags whipped in the wind, water pooling around the cobblestones. Midnight prowled restlessly, disliking storms. He hissed at thunder, shaking water from his scales in frequent bursts. Jon, meanwhile, was cloistered in the library with Sam Tarly and Maester Ambrose, who had traveled from Old Town to help organize the sprawling records. Tomes on dragon lore, genealogies, and ancient prophecies lay scattered across tables. They were searching for any references to the horns Euron had wielded, a puzzle that still haunted them. The horns had been destroyed or sunk at sea, but the knowledge of such dark instruments lingered. Jon wanted to ensure no similar artifacts existed in the world, waiting to be discovered by some new threat. Sam, beaming in his scholarly element, read from a heavy volume that smelled of mold and old parchment. It references something called Hranger's Horn in the annals of the Summer Isles, but that was supposedly used to summon leviathans, not dragons. Another text claims an artifact was buried in the ruins of Valyria that could bind any winged beast, though it doesn't specify how. The trouble is, half of these are legends scrawled by men who never left their home villages. Maester Ambrose nodded, smoothing a page with cautious fingers. And the Valyrian freehold boasted thousands of rumors about horns that could raise mountains or open the sea. Separating truth from myth is an endless task. Jon leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, scanning the pages. He recalled the horrifying note of Euron's horn echoing in his mind. The memory still raised hairs on his neck. Even if these accounts are half-mad, we need to know what might be out there. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Arya slipped in, droplets of rain glinting on her dark hair. She wore a plain tunic and breeches, her boots flecked with mud. "I thought you'd be in here, skulking among dusty scrolls," she teased quietly. Then her gaze flicked to the books and her expression grew serious. "Still worried about that horn?" Jon nodded. "One day we might face a threat we can't burn as easily. Euron almost succeeded in controlling or killing dragons. I don't want to leave our realm vulnerable to something worse." Arya studied him with those sharp gray eyes that reminded him so much of their father. "Be careful you don't drown in old nightmares, Jon. The present is complicated enough." He closed the tome he'd been perusing. "Maybe you're right, but we can't be caught unprepared again. Anyway, you never say where you go these days. Are you leaving the city again?" She shrugged, slipping into his seat. "Sometimes I follow rumors, sometimes I just want to breathe air that doesn't reek of so many people. The Riverlands are calmer now, but bandits remain. I do what I can quietly." Jon knew better than to press her for details. Arya had become a free spirit, one who served the realm in her own ways. She'd parted from the faceless men in Bravos under circumstances never fully explained, but she still possessed a certain lethal grace. He felt proud and worried all at once whenever he saw the shift in her eyes that suggested she was more than the little girl he remembered. Still, a bond of family lingered between them. A crash of thunder shook the windows and Sam yelped, nearly toppling the inkwell. Ambrose hurried to save the parchment from a flood of black liquid. Arya hopped up to help, steadying the table. Jon let out a breath and rose. "I'll leave you both to your reading. Let me know if you find anything more concrete." He beckoned Arya to follow, though she lingered a moment, giving Sam a small pat on the shoulder. Then she turned, slipping out the door with him. In the corridor, torches flickered in the draft. Rain spattered a narrow window slit. Arya tapped her foot, restless energy coiled in her. The storm's going to last for hours. The courtyard's half-flooded. At least Ghost doesn't mind the wet. Jon glanced at her. "Thinking of riding out? Storm or not?" She shrugged. "Maybe. I hear from the city watch that a small band of cutthroats has been robbing travelers on the Rosby Road. Could be the type that flees at the sight of guards but preys on unarmed folk. Might not be so bold if someone silent tracks them." He knew that Arya was more than capable of handling petty bandits, but he couldn't help the protective pang. "Be careful. The realm needs all the good people it can get." She smirked. "Don't worry, Your Grace. I'm not so easy to kill." And with that, she turned on her heel, vanishing down a dim corridor. Jon found himself alone in the hush of the hallway. A wave of weariness washed over him. Governing was more exhausting than any forced march as a ranger. Perhaps Daenerys was right, the demands never truly ended. Yet a part of him felt a quiet satisfaction that these worries were smaller than undead hordes or monstrous tyrants. The realm had come a long way. He set off to find Daenerys, navigating the labyrinth of the keep. He located her in the solar they now shared, standing by a tall window that overlooked the courtyard. She had her arms crossed, watching the downpour. Candlelight revealed the faint lines of tension in her face. When she heard him enter, she turned. "The storm has me on edge," she admitted. "We were meant to inspect the farmland expansions beyond the city. The small folk are worried about next harvest." Jon joined her by the window, observing the courtyard where 3 lines of water now ran in muddy streams. "We'll go when it's safe. Or send Robb, Sansa, or one of the advisors. I know you prefer to see it yourself, but we can't control the weather." She let out a sigh. "No, we can't. Still, it unsettles me to sit idle. I spent so many years moving from place to place, fighting to survive. Now, when tasks are delayed by something as simple as rain, I feel caged. Silly, isn't it?" "Not at all." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've both been shaped by war and hardship. Peace is unfamiliar territory." She looked at him, the corner of her mouth curving into a faint smile. The tension around her eyes softened. Maybe that's the real challenge, learning to live in a realm not constantly at war. Her gaze flicked past him, lingering on his face. In the glow of the wall sconces, her hair shimmered nearly white, her eyelashes casting delicate shadows. A swirl of warmth coursed through Jon, the memory of countless battles they had shared, the trust forged under dire circumstances, the flicker of genuine affection that had grown since. He thought of all the impossible roads that had led them here, side by side, in a city that once belonged to her ancestors. They stepped closer, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Daenerys turned her head slightly, listening to the patter of rain on stone. She set a hand against his cheek, brushed a damp curl from his forehead. Tyrion keeps hinting we should make our union official not just in politics, but in marriage. Sansa, too, though she's more subtle. Even the small folk gossip that we're not truly a king and queen until we hold a wedding feast. Jon inhaled softly. I know. We've put it off for months. She arched a pale brow. You speak as though we dread it. He cracked a small grin. We've both had our fill of ceremonies. But I suppose the realm might find comfort in a formal union, something to show that the monarchy won't dissolve into squabbling Targaryen claimants or northern separatists. Her hand slid down to rest on his chest, over the embroidered sigil that combined a dragon and direwolf. Are you certain about it, though? There's still the question of your name, your birthright. Some might say you outrank me. Others might see a marriage as me overshadowing you. Politics never sleep. Jon enclosed her hand in his. All the more reason to do it. If we remain unwed, rumors will fester. If we wed, rumors may still persist. But at least the realm sees us united. Truly united. He let out a sigh, feeling his own anxieties twist inside. I never thought I'd marry. The Night's Watch oath forbids it. But I died once, and that oath no longer holds me the same way it did. We can make a new vow that serves the realm. Something bright glimmered behind Daenerys' eyes. Hope, maybe. She drew him closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Then let's do it. If we are to share this kingdom, let us also share our lives. And not out of political convenience, but because I would have no other man at my side. Jon cupped her face, the warmth of her skin drawing him in. And you, he murmured. They let the hush of the moment enfold them, the rain outside intensifying into a steady drumbeat on the roof. He kissed her softly, the tension of the day washing away like dust under a storm. She responded with a gentleness that masked the steel at her core. In that quiet solar, the realm's countless troubles retreated, leaving only the two of them and the promise of what they might build together. By late afternoon, the storm's fury eased, leaving deep puddles across the keep's yards and the city's winding streets. Daenerys and Jon emerged from the solar to find Tyrion waiting in the corridor, dripping from a short dash through the rain. He paused, eyeing them with curiosity. You both look far too content for a dreary day, he observed, pressing water from his hair. Should I be worried? Daenerys exchanged a subtle glance with Jon, then said lightly, Worried? Only if you dread planning a royal wedding. Tyrion's brows shot up. So it's decided? His voice was uncharacteristically soft, as if he recognized the gravity behind the step. Well, my talents at organizing fiascos are unmatched. I'd be honored to arrange something more dignified this time. Jon almost laughed, imagining Tyrion fussing over table settings and guest lists. We'll keep it simpler than the usual extravagance. The realm has been bled dry by war. We'll invite the major houses, open a feast for the small folk, but no gilded monstrosities. Something honorable, not ostentatious. Tyrion exhaled in relief. Thank the gods. I don't think King's Landing could stomach another wedding on the scale of Joffrey's. The city might revolt at the mere sight of it. Daenerys patted Tyrion's shoulder as they walked. We trust your judgment, Hand. But first, let's gather the small council and share the news. We'll want their support, or at least their acknowledgement. They convened in the council chamber, where word spread quickly. Sansa and Robb arrived, each showing a flicker of surprise that quickly gave way to happiness. Davos smiled wide, though he murmured something about how quickly time flew since the wars. Grey Worm remained impassive, yet a hint of approval glimmered in his eyes, recalling how loyalty in the ranks was often tied to strong leadership at the top. Bran said nothing but gave a single solemn nod, as though he had known this was coming long before they did. Melisandre, standing near a window, clasped her hands in delight. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of logistics. They set a tentative date, perhaps in 3 moons' turn, enough to invite lords from across Westeros without straining resources. They discussed location. Naturally, the Great September of Baelor was the grand tradition for royal weddings, but the building had seen destruction during Cersei's war with the Faith. The new High Septon, a more moderate man, had nearly finished repairs. Daenerys frowned, recalling how the Sept had become a symbol of tyranny under the Sparrows, but at last agreed that tradition would matter to many lords. "Let them see that the realm is healing, along with the Sept," she said quietly. Tyrion scribbled furiously on parchment, listing houses and their likely demands. Sansa added suggestions, streamlining the events to avoid bankrupting the crown. Robb offered to handle security with men from the north, supplemented by the City Watch. Davos had ideas for ensuring the sea approaches were guarded. Daenerys and Jon exchanged glances, more than once, realizing how quickly this wedding plan felt like yet another campaign to manage. But amidst the bustle, an undercurrent of excitement buzzed in the room. The king and queen, forging a new dynasty, might secure the realm's unity for generations. News traveled swiftly by Raven. Over the following weeks, replies trickled in. The Tyrells, under Lady Olenna's surviving relatives, pledged to attend. Dorne confirmed that a small retinue would come, though warily. The Vale, the Riverlands, the Stormlands, each sent messages of acceptance, many lords voicing relief that the monarchy intended a stable future. Farther north, lords not used to traveling south grudgingly prepared. The free folk beyond the wall, though unlikely to attend, sent a rough-hewn token of goodwill via Tormund Giantsbane. It arrived in the form of a wooden carving of a giant's skull with runic inscriptions for luck. Jon placed it among the gifts in the throne room, ignoring the confusion it sparked in court. Amidst all this bustle, more everyday matters required attention. A band of sellswords calling themselves the Crimson Hawks turned up in the Reach, harassing travelers and extorting coin. Daenerys dispatched a contingent of Unsullied to handle them before they gathered momentum. A plague in Lannisport, rumored to be some flux brought by sailors from Tyrosh, demanded quarantine and supplies of fresh water. Jon and Sansa drew on memories of the dire conditions at Castle Black, shipping relief as best they could. The entire realm felt as though it were both healing and tested at once, like a man recovering from grievous wounds only to face minor fevers. In the midst of these labors, invitations to the wedding proliferated. Some questioned whether they might conjure a new alliance with Daenerys' surviving dragons and Jon's monstrous midnight. Did the realm truly need 4 adult dragons flying overhead on a day devoted to peace? But Daenerys insisted that Drogon, Regal, and Viserion remain near King's Landing, and Jon refused to leave midnight behind in case some unscrupulous foe tried to seize an opportunity. So the city braced for a day when the sky might fill with wings once more, not for war, but for a moment of celebration. The Great September of Baelor, partly rebuilt by hundreds of laborers, stood in scaffolding. Workers hurried to make it presentable. The main dome had been completed, white marble shining, though some outer sections still needed stone carving. Inside, artisans hammered to place stained glass panels depicting scenes of mercy and justice, while the new High Septon insisted on simpler decorations than the flamboyant excess of old. Tyrion orchestrated a compromise, letting them adorn the Sept's interior with fresh flowers from Highgarden, along with subtle Targaryen and Stark banners. At last, the appointed day drew near. The capital swelled with lords, ladies, knights, and their retinues. Camps ringed the city walls, tents of myriad colors fluttering in the breeze. Merchants filled the streets, hawking commemorative tokens, small wooden dragons, silver dire wolves, ribbons in black and red. The small folk, many of whom had lived in terror during the last royal wedding, held their breath and prayed this one would bring no tragedy. The presence of dragons soared above them, a sign that no one would dare disrupt the ceremony with violence, none except a fool or a madman. On the eve of the wedding, Daenerys and Jon both felt a swirl of nerves despite their outward composure. Tradition dictated that they not see each other from sundown until the ceremony, though they found it somewhat silly. Still, they played along, if only to honor the customs that many lords cherished. Daenerys stayed in her chambers, flanked by Melisandre and a small retinue of ladies who helped finalize her attire, a gown of white silk with subtle silver and red embroidery shaped like dragon scales at the cuffs. Melisandre brushed her hair until it gleamed, weaving small braids that signified the victories she had won. Jon stayed in a separate suite, accompanied by Robb and Davos. He had never cared for finery, but tradition required a measure of splendor. He wore black velvet doublet and breeches edged in gray and red filigree. The direwolf sigil was stitched on his right breast, the Targaryen dragon on his left, smaller but no less significant. Sansa arrived to fuss over a few final details, adjusting the cloak that he would wear. The cloak, stark white and thick, symbolized the bride's acceptance into her husband's house, though their union was not exactly the standard custom. She teased him gently, "You look more comfortable in mail and fur, but you wear this well." He only smiled wryly. Night deepened, torches and lanterns lit the city. Musicians rehearsed outside the sept, their tunes echoing in the crisp air. Many lords feasted in their own camps, exchanging gossip about what tomorrow's wedding would bring. Some speculated that Daenerys might announce a pregnancy, while others whispered about Jon's rumored birthright overshadowing hers. A few cynics muttered that any wedding featuring so many dragons was doomed to end in ashes. But no major plots seemed to surface, as if the memory of past carnage kept dissenters silent. That night, Jon slept fitfully. Dreams of Winterfell mingled with fleeting images of Daenerys standing in a snow-strewn field, beckoning him forward. He dreamed of Ned Stark's shadowy form, seeming both proud and sorrowful. When morning finally came, he awoke to pale sunlight filtering through the shutters and the sound of horns from the distant city gates. It was time. He dressed with Robb and Davos's help, strapping on a short sword more for ceremony than use. The heavy cloak Sansa had prepared rested on his shoulders. Grey Wolf, as some called him now, for bridging Stark heritage with Targaryen might. Ghost trotted at his side, tail swishing, though the dire wolf would not enter the sept. He disliked large crowds and enclosed spaces. Outside, a procession awaited, horses in polished barding, knights in half-plate forming a guard. The crowd parted as Jon emerged, some cheering, some bowing. He felt every eye upon him. Leading his horse by the reins, he climbed into the saddle with practiced grace. Robb mounted beside him, wearing the Stark sigil on his surcoat. Sansa and Arya followed in a carriage, though Arya seemed restless about riding behind locked doors. Bran took a separate coach, as the sept was not far, but the uneven streets made it difficult for his wheeled chair. They set off through the winding avenues. People thronged the streets, tossing petals or simply staring in awe. Soldiers of the city watch kept the route clear. At times, Jon glimpsed the flash of black wings overhead, midnight, restless even during a wedding. But the dragons had been told to circle the city from a distance so as not to alarm the guests too much. The bells of the sept tolled solemnly, echoing across King's Landing with a resonance that reminded Jon of the old stories about Aegon's conquest. He wondered if the city had rung with the same tension then. At the foot of the Great September, the party dismounted. Huge double doors stood open, the inside illuminated by hundreds of candles. White marble steps stretched forward, lined with members of the King's Guard and Queen's Guard. Grey Worm stood at attention, spear in hand, alongside a half-dozen unsullied wearing formal black plumes. Tyrion waited near the threshold, carefully smoothing his doublet. He offered Jon a curt nod. Just like facing the others, only with more flowers and less terror, he quipped. Jon gave a nervous snort, stepping inside. The hush within struck him. Rows of pews were filled with lords, ladies, knights, and dignitaries from every corner of Westeros. Their finery gleamed in candlelight. At the far end, near the altar, the new High Septon in his robes of pale gray stood calmly, flanked by lesser septons. A choir hummed softly, a melody that rose and fell like the tides. Jon's heart hammered, but he forced himself forward. Robb walked at his side, Sansa and Arya behind them, representing House Stark. Over to the right, House Targaryen's supporters filled another row, Melisandre, Grey Worm, and various loyalists from Essos. He reached the altar, exhaling slowly. The music swelled, a single harp threading a sweet note. Then the congregation shifted, eyes turning toward the rear doors. Daenerys emerged, a vision in pale silk that caught the candlelight, silver hair arranged in regal braids. She held her head high, walking with measured grace down the aisle. Tyrion had the honor of escorting her, though she scarcely leaned on his arm. The hush grew deeper as though everyone present held their breath. For a moment, Jon forgot the watchers, the politics, everything but the woman approaching him. She appeared both resolute and glowing, her gown whispering along the marble floor. When she stopped before him, her eyes met his with an emotion that transcended titles. The High Septon began the ceremony. He spoke of unity, of two houses bridging old divides, of the realm's new dawn after the long night. Jon listened numbly, mind swirling. When the priest asked them to recite their vows, Jon repeated the words in a steady voice. He pledged to protect, to honor, to share in the burdens of rule. Daenerys answered in kind, her voice soft but unwavering, promising to stand by him, to lead for the good of all. The sept's acoustics carried each syllable to the far corners where knights and ladies sat enthralled. Then Sansa stepped forward with the wedding cloak. In tradition, the cloak bore the bridegroom's house colors, symbolizing that the bride was taken under his protection. But here, the cloak combined stark gray fur with Targaryen red lining, signifying something unique, that Daenerys embraced both houses or that the old ways were being reshaped by new. Jon draped it carefully over her shoulders. She looked at him, eyes shining, and together they turned to face the congregation. The High Septon raised his hands. I present to you King Jon of Houses Targaryen and Stark and Queen Daenerys of House Targaryen, united in matrimony by the grace of the Seven, by the old gods of the North, and by the will of the realm. His voice rang out. Let any who contest this union speak or forever hold their peace. A breathless pause. No one stirred. Jon half expected some dramatic outburst, memories of the Red Wedding or Joffrey's wedding haunted him. But the hush remained unbroken. Then the High Septon smiled. In the names of the gods I proclaim them husband and wife. Applause and cheers thundered through the sept, echoing off columns and dome. The choir launched into a jubilant melody. Daenerys and Jon turned to each other, meeting in a kiss that sealed the vows. It was gentle yet rife with a promise of belonging to one another, not just as rulers, but as two people who had fought side by side in darkness. When they parted, the crowd's roar intensified, many rising to their feet. Up near the front, Tyrion clapped politely, eyes faintly misted, perhaps with relief that no catastrophe had befallen them. Robb grinned broadly, clasping Sansa's hand. Arya leaned against a pillar, a rare smile hovering on her lips. Bran's expression was unreadable, though there was a hint of contentment in his gaze. Even the lords who had come out of duty rather than devotion recognized this was a moment unlike any in living memory, a Targaryen queen and a Stark-born dragon king forging a marriage that might unite the realm for generations. They emerged from the sept to find the city alive with celebration. As the newlywed monarchs climbed into a gilded carriage, people lined the streets, throwing petals, cheering, waving scraps of cloth in black, white, and red. Jugglers and musicians performed on corners. The city watch kept order, but there was little need. Rarely had the capital experienced such unforced jubilation. Perhaps the small folk hoped that if these two powerful figures could be happy, peace would endure. Back at the Red Keep, a lavish but not outrageous feast awaited them. Long tables groaned under roasts, pies, fresh fruits, and sweet wines. The great hall had been decorated with ribbons and flowers. Musicians played lively tunes while guests mingled. Daenerys and Jon entered to a fanfare of trumpets, taking seats at a raised table. The entire chamber erupted in applause. Servants poured wine into golden cups and the newlyweds toasted each other before the crowd. Tyrion, uncharacteristically solemn, stood to give a short speech. He recalled the horrors they had overcome, White Walkers, tyrants, treachery, and praised the new king and queen for forging unity. He ended with a flourish of wit that earned hearty laughter and a round of table-thumping. As the feast continued, lords from different corners of Westeros approached to offer well wishes. Olenna's grandnephew from Highgarden gave a hamper of golden roses. The Dornish delegates presented flasks of rare spiced wine. Even the Vale's stoic knights seemed in good humor. Jon tried to stay gracious, though feasting crowds made him uneasy. He leaned over to Daenerys more than once, murmuring that the attention felt overwhelming. She smiled, confessing that she, too, preferred open skies to crowded halls. But duty pressed them on, so they endured, exchanging pleasantries and receiving congratulations. At times, Daenerys's hand found Jon's under the table, giving a small, reassuring squeeze. The revelry stretched late into the evening. Wine flowed freely, men and women danced in swirling costumes. Arya slipped out at some point, though not before sharing a congratulatory nod with Jon. Robb led a group of Northmen in boisterous toasts, while Davos tried to keep them from guzzling all the Arbor gold. Sansa oversaw a graceful dance with a southern lord, gliding with a poise she had honed in her youth. Even Tyrion took a turn on the floor, surprisingly light on his feet. Finally, hours past sunset, Jon and Daenerys made their departure from the hall. The tradition was that the wedding night was theirs alone. Torches burned in the corridors as they slipped away, guided by quiet attendants. Outside, the rain had begun again, a gentle patter that made the courtyard glisten. Midnight rumbled from his distant perch as though sensing the shift in the castle's atmosphere. They entered the royal chambers, an expanded suite that combined old Targaryen apartments with an additional wing. Daenerys closed the door behind them. In the dim glow of a few candles, they stood for a moment, the hush of the night filling the space. Jon shrugged off his heavy cloak, stepping forward to help Daenerys with hers. She let it slide from her shoulders, revealing the silver-trimmed gown. Her hair had begun to loosen from the braids, wavy tresses framing her face. "I think the realm is satisfied with our show," she murmured, a flicker of humor in her eyes. Jon's pulse thrummed. He lightly touched her cheek, his voice hushed. "Then let's have something that's just ours." Leaning in, he kissed her softly, tasting the lingering sweetness of wine on her lips. She responded with a warmth that made his heart pound. They had been close before, had shared nights of solace and whispered affections, but tonight felt different. This was the first time they stood together as husband and wife, bound by oaths that encompassed both themselves and a kingdom's future. In the quiet after midnight, rain tapping at the windows, they shed the burden of crowns and titles, letting only the warmth of each other's presence fill the darkness. It was, at last, a moment free of watchful eyes, free of ghosts from the past, free of the fear that had dogged them for so long. Whatever challenges the morrow would bring. For this night, they were simply two souls who had fought to protect the world and found each other in the process. The next morning, the city awoke to the news that the wedding festivities had been peaceful. No assassinations, no vile betrayals, just genuine celebration. The small folk took it as a good omen, sending small prayers to the seven or to the old gods if they were from the north. Some said the presence of 4 dragons had ensured no one dared disrupt the occasion. Others whispered that the king and queen must be blessed indeed to have survived so many perils unscathed. Jon and Daenerys emerged to find well-wishes piled in the throne room, everything from barrels of mead to bolts of rare silk from the Summer Islands. Lady Sansa teased that the gifts might fill a new treasury by themselves. Tyrion rubbed his hands together, joking that the cost of storing them would exceed their value if they weren't careful. Robb merely clapped Jon on the back, murmuring about the strangeness of seeing his brother as a wedded king. For the realm, the wedding marked a new chapter. For the couple at the heart of it, it was the first step into unknown territory, peaceful rule without overshadowing crisis. Yet as the days passed, they realized that peace brought its own labyrinth of challenges. The lords who once bent the knee out of fear now wanted boons, privileges, expansions of territory. The free cities sent embassies brimming with polite but pointed requests. From the north came rumors that not all free folk found harmony with kneelers. A few petty disputes flared like brushfires, requiring measured intervention. When 2 minor lords clashed over farmland near Maidenpool, Jon had to dispatch mediators to quell the dispute before it sparked a wider conflict. Meanwhile, Daenerys devoted hours to scouring messages from Essos. Freedmen in Meereen had been rattled by the infiltration of slavers posing as merchants. She raged at the thought that her hard-won liberation might be undermined. Some urged her to sail east with her dragons and purge the threat. But the realm in Westeros was fragile, and she could not abandon it so soon. She wrote letters, dispatched envoys, and conferred with Grey Worm about sending a small force to bolster Meereen's defenses. If the day came that she must cross the sea again, she would do it with caution. Jon, too, grappled with balancing loyalties. He couldn't ignore that some northern lords grumbled about the Targaryen banners in Winterfell. He worked with Robb to ensure each holdfast felt recognized. Sansa's presence in Riverrun or traveling near it helped the Riverlands remain stable, yet the realm was vast and the king could not be everywhere. One afternoon, soon after the wedding, Bran requested a private audience with Jon and Daenerys. They met in the godwood that had been replanted in King's Landing under the guidance of northerners who missed the heart trees. It was a modest grove nowhere near as grand as Winterfell's, but a single weirwood sapling stood at its center, carved with a face that had not yet bled red sap. Bran waited in his wheeled chair, quiet as the breeze stirred the leaves. Jon knelt beside his brother, noticing how distant Bran's eyes appeared. Daenerys stood close, arms folded. "You wanted to speak with us, Bran?" Jon asked gently. Bran's gaze flicked to the slender weirwood. "I see far, yet even I do not see everything," he began softly. "The threads of the realm's fate are woven in ways that perplex me. I wanted to warn you that a shadow stirs in the east, beyond the Dothraki Sea, across the Red Waste near the shadow lands of Askai. I have glimpsed fragments. A power older than men, stirring as though woken by the conflicts we endured." Daenerys' face paled. "Askai is far from Westeros. You suspect it threatens us here?" Bran let out a breath. "All is connected. The White Walkers were not the only threat that slumbered through ages. Forces gather, shapes in the darkness. I cannot say if they will come across the sea or remain quiescent. But be vigilant. The realm must be prepared. Dragons alone may not suffice if this shadow grows. Jon tensed, recalling Melisandre's cryptic warnings, the swirl of old magic. What do you suggest we do? Bran shook his head slowly. Learn, watch, strengthen alliances. Keep your hearts open to the possibility that the next enemy may not come in open battle. It may seep in like poison in a cup. Daenerys exhaled, her jaw tightening. We only just found peace. Bran rested a hand on Jon's wrist. Remember that the long night was ended not only by steel and flame, but by unity. If another darkness rises, the realm cannot be fractured again. Jon nodded. We won't let it happen. Thank you, Bran, for warning us. Bran's eyes momentarily flickered white as though he saw something beyond them. Then he returned to himself and bid them farewell. Jon and Daenerys left the Godwood with an uneasy feeling as though the memory of the White Walkers lingered in the rustle of leaves. Yet life went on. They did not sound an alarm to the realm or speak of nebulous threats from as high. Instead, they redoubled efforts to ensure each corner of Westeros prospered. They hammered out an accord with bravos that balanced trade and avoided crippling debts. They arranged a system of roads radiating from the capital enforced by small garrisons so that travelers and goods could move more freely. Northern lords slowly accepted Daenerys as queen. She journeyed to Winterfell months after the wedding, facing the biting cold with a new perspective. Jon's heart pounded when he saw her stand in the courtyard that once belonged to Ned Stark, the wind tugging at her silver hair. Ghost bounded across the yard, greeting them in a swirl of snow. Bran, who had traveled ahead, welcomed them with a slight nod, while Robb and Sansa oversaw the keep. The small folk in the north, once suspicious of Targaryens, quietly marveled at the queen's calm presence and the obvious devotion between her and Jon. A feast was held in the Great Hall, simpler than King's Landing's celebrations but full of hearty northern fare. Daenerys tried strong ale, coughed at the bitterness, and graciously laughed along with the local lords. One evening, they walked through the crypts beneath Winterfell. Jon carried a torch, the orange glow flickering over stone statues of long-dead Starks. Lyanna's effigy rested among them, carved from gray stone with hands folded. He paused there, setting the torch in a bracket. Daenerys approached, resting a hand on Jon's shoulder. He inhaled, remembering the truth of his mother's identity, how everything had been shaped by her love and Ned's loyalty. I never knew her, Jon murmured. Not truly. Only the stories that others told. Now I stand here as her son, recognized as both a Stark and a Targaryen. I wonder if this is what she wanted for me. Daenerys' voice was soft. She saved you from Robert's wrath. Whatever else, she must have hoped you'd live free of that fear. Perhaps she never imagined we'd stand here like this, ruling a united realm. Jon set a hand on Lyanna's stone fingers. I hope she's at peace, that we're honoring whatever dream she had for us. They lingered a moment longer in silence, a hush broken only by the distant drip of water in the crypt. Then Daenerys drew him gently away, the flame of the torch guiding them back to the living world above. Seasons turned. The realm settled into the first genuine calm it had experienced since Robert's rebellion. Fields were tilled, towns rebuilt. Daenerys and Jon maintained a traveling court, alternating between King's Landing, Dragonstone, and the major strongholds. At each stop, local lords and merchants gathered to present petitions or praise. The presence of dragons overhead discouraged banditry, though pockets of discontent lingered. Ties with the free folk beyond the wall improved as Tormund brokered deals for trade in timber and furs. Yet no Golden Age proceeds without friction. Minor rebellions erupted in the Iron Islands, where some rebellious captains refused to recognize any monarchy. They scuttled a pair of crown ships near the Misty Islands. Daenerys responded by flying Drogon out with a small fleet commanded by Davos, cornering the rebels on a rocky isle. Midnight arrived soon after, carrying Jon. The sight of two monstrous dragons overhead ended the skirmish before it could grow. That kind of swift action became emblematic of their rule, compromise first, then overwhelming force if necessary. The lesson was not lost on other malcontents. Meanwhile, Daenerys' envoys in Essos reported that Yunkai and Astapor remained free but uneasy. Meereen, under Daario Naharis's nominal leadership, had weathered attempts by old slaver families to reclaim power. Each time, Daario suppressed them with the help of local freedmen councils. But tensions smoldered. Daenerys occasionally dreamed of returning to finalize the freedom of Slavers Bay, but she could not forsake Westeros, not when the realm needed both her and Jon to sustain its fragile unity. Year by year, the monarchy's foundation solidified. Children across Westeros grew up hearing stories of the Black Dragon Midnight, the largest in living memory, and how it shared the skies with Drogon, Regal, and Viserion. Bards composed ballads praising the wedding that ended centuries of division between North and South, though they embroidered the truth, claiming it was prophesied in ancient tongues. Farmers and fishermen found a measure of stability they had lacked for decades. Lords who once schemed for personal gain discovered that the Watchers in black cloaks or unsullied harnesses kept them in check. The Iron Throne remained an intimidating symbol, but so long as Daenerys and Jon reigned together, it seemed to many that the kingdom had a fair chance at lasting peace. In the quieter times, Jon and Daenerys discovered normalcy in small moments, walking the castle gardens at dawn, riding out together on horseback instead of dragons, sharing confidences about their hopes for the future. They had come to care for each other deeply. What began in war and necessity had settled into an abiding partnership that transcended the hardships they had endured. Rumors buzzed about whether a child would soon follow. Daenerys felt no surety either way, but the notion no longer seemed impossible. All the while, Bran's warning about an eastern shadow lingered at the back of Jon's thoughts. Now and then, a raven arrived from far-flung travelers or red priests, bearing cryptic tidings of strange lights or monstrous sightings near the Shadowlands. Most people dismissed such rumors as tall tales. Yet Jon quietly instructed watchful eyes in the port cities to remain alert for anything unusual drifting across the narrow sea. He had faced the White Walkers. He would not let complacency doom them again. One crisp morning, nearly 4 years after their wedding, Daenerys found Jon in the Red Keep Library, a place he frequented whenever time allowed. He was thumbing through an old genealogical record, wearing a simple gray tunic, black cloak draped over a chair. She slipped behind him, looping her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his shoulder. He tilted his head, smiling softly. "You're up early. Another dream?" She nodded. "Yes. Nothing troubling, just seeing new lands." Perhaps it was memories of Essos creeping back. "I wanted fresh air." She glanced at the heavy tome. "Digging through old Stark lineages?" Jon shrugged. "Curiosity. There's so much we never knew about the Targaryen Stark ties before. The ancients hardly wrote it all down." She pressed a light kiss to the side of his neck. "Perhaps it's better we make our own path without illusions that blood alone defines us." He closed the book, turning to face her. She wore a riding cloak of dark blue, her hair bound in a single braid. "You going somewhere?" he asked, noticing her garb. "A short ride beyond the city," she said. "The farmland expansions near Rosby have borne fruit. I want to see it for myself. Tyrion's fussing about new trade routes. Come with me." Jon considered the day's schedule: a meeting with the Braavosi envoy about shipping taxes, a hearing with 2 minor lords squabbling over a border. It all felt routine, which meant perhaps Davos or Sansa could manage in his stead. "I should," he murmured, a small grin tugging his lips. "We always talk about doing something for ourselves, but never have time." She offered her hand. "Then let's seize it." Before long, they were riding out of King's Landing with a minimal guard, no full retinue, only a handful of trusted knights and a few Dothraki outriders who had chosen to remain in Westeros. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Daenerys and Jon rode side by side, letting the horses set an easy pace. Past the city gates, farmland stretched in gentle hills, newly cultivated fields dotted with farmsteads. Workers paused to bow or wave, children running out to see the king and queen who soared dragons but rode horses like ordinary folk. They talked about small things: the new orchard near Rosby, the plan to build a small holdfast for traveling merchants, and how ghosts seemed to enjoy prowling the castle at night. They teased each other about who was better at archery. She claimed she'd never learned properly, while he teased that she'd best stick to dragons. The tension of court life fell away in the hush of open land. After a while, they turned off the main road, following a dirt track that led to a gentle slope overlooking the rolling fields. Sunlight bathed the hills in golden light, a reminder of how far they had come from the bleak snows and the war-torn wastes of the past. They reined in, dismounting to let the horses graze. Jon took Daenerys' hand, guiding her to a grassy spot under a lone oak. Soft breezes ruffled their cloaks. From here, the city's walls were distant silhouettes, the waters of Blackwater Bay glinting just beyond. They settled side by side on a flat rock. For a time, they simply breathed, gazing at the farmland that fed their capital. A pair of hawks circled overhead, free in the vast sky. Daenerys leaned her head against Jon's shoulder. "We built this," she said softly, voice tinged with wonder. "Or rather, we helped them build it, the realm's people. A few years ago, the roads here were a battlefield. Now they're farmland. Doesn't seem real sometimes." Jon slipped an arm around her waist. "I know. I remember hunting down stray Lannister outriders near these very fields. Now it's different. We might actually be forging something that lasts." She turned, meeting his gaze. Their closeness was both comfortable and charged, the warmth of her breath mingling with his. He thought of their wedding day, the vows they'd spoken, the crises they'd faced since. Beneath it all was a bond neither had expected but both cherished. A fleeting memory of his vow to the Night's Watch flitted across his mind, how that youth had never imagined having a wife, a family, a future. Life had taken so many turns. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We'll protect it," he murmured. "Whatever comes." Her eyes flickered, a faint cloud passing over her face. "If the rumors from the east prove true, if another darkness rises, will we be forced to leave all this behind and wage war again?" He set his forehead gently against hers, voice low. "We'll do what we must, but we'll do it together. And we'll remember what we're fighting for, not a throne, not a crown, but these fields, these people, the children who deserve a life free from terror." Her expression softened. "That's what I want too." They lingered there, the moment hushed, hearts beating in quiet harmony. Daenerys closed her eyes, resting in his embrace. Jon pressed a light kiss to her temple. In the distance, the small guard detail politely waited, giving their king and queen space. The day felt suspended, no horns of alarm, no urgent ravens, no watchers glaring. Just two rulers who had discovered that power could serve something higher than ambition. Yet, as they watched the farmland, their thoughts inevitably turned to the future. They recalled Bran's warnings, the fleeting rumors from distant shores, the knowledge that peace never endured forever in the world of ice and fire. But for now, the sky was clear, the realm prospered, and the bond they shared was stronger than any threat that might come. So they breathed in the promise of a new dawn, hearts aligned, ready to face tomorrow's challenges as king and queen, husband and wife, and guardians of a realm they had sworn to protect. And if war or shadow someday returned, they would meet it side by side, fire and frost intertwined, forging hope from the embers of a once broken land.